Hello, my friend. Tonight we descend beneath the dust of ancient Mesopotamia, into a darkness where the earth remembers what the world forgot. The sun is setting over a plain of cracked clay. The wind moves low across the ground, carrying the taste of salt, ash, and old river mud. Far away, the Euphrates bends through the fading light, quiet now, but never truly still. Its banks are empty, its reeds whisper, its water, brown and slow, slides past mounds that look like natural hills, though they are not hills at all. They are buried cities. Beneath them lie rooms without roofs, courtyards without voices, streets packed with silt, and walls that once held back crowds, animals, smoke, and prayer. Beneath them lie ovens gone cold, jars cracked open by pressure and time, and graves where the dead were placed with beads, bowls, and a few small offerings for a journey no one could describe with certainty. And deeper still, beneath fallen brick and wind-blown sand, there are tablets. They wait in silence. Some are no larger than a hand. Some are broken into pieces. Some are hardened by accident, fired in the flames of destruction when a building burned and a city fell into panic. Their surfaces are covered with small wedge-shaped marks, pressed by reed styluses into wet clay thousands of years ago. At first glance, they seem modest, brown, heavy, plain. Yet each tablet is a locked door, and once that door is opened, a lost world begins to breathe again. Imagine a night of danger in one of those cities. The air is thick with smoke from lamps and cooking fires. Somewhere beyond the wall, dogs bark into the dark. A gate has been closed. Men stand near the entrance with spears, their shadows trembling against the mud-brick towers. Inside the city, a scribe sits by lamplight, bending over clay while the room around him holds its breath. His hands are steady, but the world beyond them is not. He presses signs into the damp surface, a list of grain, a temple account, a dispute over land, a hymn to a goddess, a royal boast, a lament for a city destroyed. To him, it may be work, it may be duty, it may be fear disguised as order. He does not know that one day, long after his name has vanished from every living mouth, those marks will become a voice calling across 5,000 years. Outside, the city listens to the night. The streets are narrow, winding between walls of baked and unbaked brick. Doorways open into houses where families sleep close together, where children dream beside baskets of wool, where old women murmur prayers under their breath. In courtyards, jars are sealed. Goats shift in their pens. The smell of dates, barley, oil, and river dampness settles into every surface. Above the roofs, the temple rises. It is not merely a building. It is the heart of the city, a mountain made by human hands on a land almost flat enough to seem endless. Its terraces climb toward the sky, where the stars appear sharp and cold. The people below believe that heaven is not far away. It presses down over them, watching, measuring, demanding. The gods are near, the gods are dangerous. The gods must be fed, praised, soothed, and remembered. Yet the tablets reveal something more fragile than divine power. They reveal human anxiety. They speak of fields that must be measured, canals that must be cleared, workers who must be counted, beer that must be distributed, offerings that must arrive at the proper hour. They speak of contracts, debts, marriages, slaves, merchants, kings, widows, soldiers, shepherds, singers, and children. They speak of a world where survival depends on memory, and memory depends on clay. For a while, the city seems eternal. Its walls stand firm, its granaries are full, its priests know the rituals, its scribes know the signs, its rulers proclaim that the gods have chosen them. Boats move along the canals with cargoes of grain, wool, fish, timber, copper, and stone. Donkeys arrive from the edges of the desert, their backs loaded with goods from lands the city people may never see. In the market, voices rise and fall like water, but beneath this surface of order something trembles. The rivers are generous, but they are never obedient. Floods come too high or too low, Silt chokes the channels. Salt gathers in the fields, whitening the soil like a quiet illness. Rival cities watch one another across the plain. One king claims a boundary, another king refuses. A canal is blocked. A field is seized. A god is insulted. Men sharpen blades. Messengers hurry through the gates. Then, one season, the balance breaks. Perhaps the enemy comes at dawn. Perhaps they come under a sky burned pale by heat. Perhaps they move along the canal banks, raising dust, carrying shields of leather and wood. The city sees them too late, or sees them and cannot stop them. Farmers flee from the fields. Women gather children into courtyards. Temple officials rush to protect statues, records, silver, and sacred vessels. Somewhere a door is barred. Somewhere a prayer is shouted. The walls that seemed permanent are suddenly only mud. A flame catches in a roof beam. Smoke climbs into the air. The temple storehouse is struck. Shelves collapse. Clay tablets scatter across the floor. Some are crushed under falling brick. Some are buried in ash. Some are hardened by the very fire meant to erase the city. Voices vanish. Footsteps disappear. A house becomes a ruin. A street becomes a layer. A life becomes an object. And then the wind returns. Years pass. Then centuries. The rivers shift. New people walk over the old foundations without knowing whose rooms lie under their feet. Rain softens walls. Sand fills courtyards. Bricks return to mud. The great city shrinks into a mound, and the mound becomes part of the landscape. A silent swelling on the plain. But the tablets remain. They lie in storerooms, under floors, in rubbish pits, beside broken jars and animal bones. They lie where frightened hands dropped them. They lie where scribes carefully stacked them. They lie in the ruined chambers of schools where students once copied signs again and again, learning how to turn sound, number, grain, law, and prayer into marks that could outlive the body. This is the mystery at the centre of the buried world. A civilization can lose its kings. It can lose its walls. It can lose its language from common speech and surrender its gods to the names of other gods. Its canals can fill with dust. Its fields can turn bitter. Its temples can collapse into shapeless earth. Yet a small tablet of clay, pressed by a tired hand in a room lit by oil, can endure when palaces do not. In that endurance, the lost world returns not as a legend, but as detail. A ration of barley for a worker, a hymn sung to Inanna, a complaint about a boundary stone, a king declaring victory, a teacher correcting a student, a merchant sending goods across dangerous distance, a lament describing a city as if it were a mother abandoned by her children. These fragments do not give us silence. They give us breath, labour, fear, ambition, devotion, and grief. The ground of Mesopotamia is not empty. It is layered with human effort. Every mound is a folded memory. Every broken tablet is a pause in a sentence that began when writing itself was young. Under the plain, beneath dust and salt and the roots of dry grass, the first cities still speak in the only way left to them. Not loudly, not completely, but patiently, and in the deep quiet of the buried earth. The wedges in the clay wait for eyes that can read them, asking us to listen to a world that was lost, not because it was small, but because time is vast. Between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the world opens into distance. The land is wide, low, and luminous, a great alluvial plain where the sky feels larger than the earth. In the early morning, mist gathers over the river channels, and the reeds stand in silver ranks along the banks. Waterbirds lift from the marshes. Fish flash beneath the brown surface. The mud is dark where it is wet, pale where it dries, and cracked into hard plates where the sun has worked upon it for days. This is not a gentle landscape, though it can seem peaceful. It is a place made by movement. The rivers descend from mountains far to the north, carrying snowmelt, stones, silt, trees, and memory from lands the southern farmers may never see. They twist through plains, split into branches, abandon old beds, flood low ground, and withdraw again. They bring life, but not by promise. They bring danger with the same hand. Across this country, distance matters. A man standing in one city might see nothing but flatness, reed beds, fields, canals, and a pale horizon. Yet beyond that horizon lies another city, and beyond that, another, each with its own god, ruler, walls, storehouses, and ambitions. Uruk rises near one waterway. Ur holds power near another. Nippur guards sacred prestige. Lagash, Umma, Eridu, Kish, and Lhasa belong to a landscape that is both crowded and immense. No single city is alone. They are linked by canals cut through the earth like deliberate veins. Some are broad enough for boats heavy with grain. Others are narrow channels that carry water into fields of barley, sesame, flax, vegetables, and date palms. Men clear mud from them with baskets and hoes. Officials measure them. Farmers watch them anxiously. A blocked canal can become a political insult. A broken levee can become hunger. The rivers feed the cities, but the canals teach them discipline. A field in southern Mesopotamia does not simply receive water and flourish. It must be levelled, divided, flooded, drained, and watched. Too little water, and the crop fails. Too much water, and the roots drown. Leave the soil carelessly watered year after year, and salt rises slowly toward the surface, a white crust that turns abundance into warning. In this world, survival becomes administration long before it becomes empire. Far beyond the cultivated fields, the land changes. To the west and southwest stretch deserts and steppe, where pastoral groups move with sheep, goats, tents, and seasonal knowledge. Their world is not empty. It has roots, wells, grazing grounds, stories, rivalries, and alliances. At certain times, herders come near the cities to trade wool, animals, leather, and perhaps news. At other times, city people look toward them with suspicion, imagining danger beyond the settled edge. To the east, the horizon lifts. Mountains rise in the distance, tarred and blue under the sun. From those uplands come stones, metals, timber, and people who know passes, valleys, and highland roads. Copper must travel from far places. Tin is even more elusive. Fine stone for seals, beads, and statues arrives through networks of exchange that cross climates, languages, and political borders. The cities of the plain have mud in abundance, but little else. Their wealth depends on reaching outward. This is one of the quiet revelations of Sumer. Its greatest cities are built in a land that lacks many of the materials of greatness. There are no forests of tall cedar in the southern plain. There are no nearby mountains of building stone. There are no rich seams of metal beneath every town. There is mud, reed, water, fish, grain, wool, and human labour. So the people learn to trade, organise, negotiate, raid, bargain, and remember, the lack itself becomes a force. It pulls them into the wider world. Boats move like dark insects along the canals. Some carry sacks of barley from temple fields. Some carry jars of beer, baskets of dates, bundles of reeds, woolen textiles, fish, and oil. Larger vessels may follow the river toward the Gulf, where marsh, river, and sea blend into a shimmering, uncertain edge. There, merchants can imagine horizons beyond the known water, to Dilmun, Magan, and lands associated with copper, stone, wood, and distant goods that arrive with a hint of salt and mystery. The sea is not a border, it is a road. In the marshlands, houses may rise on reed platforms, people pole narrow boats through channels of green shadow. They know birds, fish, flood seasons, and the hidden passages of water. Their world seems far from the tall temples of the cities, yet it is bound to them by fish, reeds as labour and movement. The marsh is a frontier, a refuge, a pantry, and a maze. Farther north, the plain narrows and the rivers draw closer to older routes of exchange. Caravans move with donkeys, slow and patient, their packs loaded with textile, grain, precious stones, metals, and goods wrapped against dust. Every journey is uncertain. A merchant must think about water, bandits, officials, tolls, weather, and the changing mood of foreign rulers. A road is never merely a line across land. It is a chain of risks. Still, goods move. With them move words, songs, craftsmen, styles, gods, and stories. A cylinder seal carved in one city may impress its image on clay in another. A measure used for grain may shape how debts are recorded miles away. A myth attached to one shrine may travel in the mouth of a singer or scribe. Culture spreads not only by conquest, but by hands passing objects across thresholds. The cities themselves are islands of density in a demanding environment. Their walls enclose houses packed close together, lanes too narrow for easy passage, courtyards, workshops, animal pens, shrines, ovens, drains, and spaces where people gather in shade. Smoke rises in the morning, potters turn clay, weavers knot and beat wool into cloth, brewers stir grain, bakers press dough against hot surfaces, children carry water, officials count, priests purify, scribes bend over clay. Beyond the walls, fields spread outward in bands of green and gold. Date palms stand in orderly groves, their trunks rough, their crowns whispering in heat. Barley ripens under a fierce sun. Workers bend in rows, their feet in mud, their backs shining with sweat. Oxen pull ploughs through wet soil. Shepherds guide flocks across stubbled ground. At harvest, grain becomes tax, ration, offering, wage, debt, and survival. The city and countryside are not separate. They breathe together. A temple depends on fields it may not see from its terrace. A palace depends on labourers whose names appear only as marks in accounts. A soldier depends on barley grown by a farmer, and the farmer depends on walls defended by soldiers. A merchant depends on textile workers, boatmen, herders, seal cutters, and officials who trust a mark pressed into clay. Across vast plains, power is measured in movement. Water must move, grain must move, labour must move, messages must move, offerings must move from field to shrine, from shrine to storehouse, from storehouse to mouth. When movement is steady, the world appears orderly. When it falters, the whole system trembles. At night, the scale becomes quiet. The rivers darken beneath the stars. Fires glow in villages. Watchmen stand by gates. Boats are tied to banks. In the distance, a temple platform rises above flat roofs, its upper shrine catching moonlight. The plain seems still, but stillness is only a surface. Beneath it run canals, obligations, rivalries, and roads reaching toward mountains, deserts, marshes, and the sea. This is the world that made Sumer possible, not a single kingdom at first, and not one simple people in isolation, but a web of cities, waters, fields, roots, gods, and ambitions stretched across a difficult land. Its greatness grew from the need to connect what nature had scattered. Its danger grew from the same condition. Every river bend promised life. Every distance invited desire. Who were the people who pressed their thoughts into clay? The question seems simple at first. A name is offered, Sumerians. Yet the name does not behave like a closed door. It opens into a corridor of uncertainties, half-lit by archaeology, language, myth, and silence. They lived in this southern Mesopotamia, built cities of mud brick, honoured gods with food and song, invented systems of writing, and left behind thousands of tablets. Still, the deeper one listens, the stranger the question becomes. Who are they? Beneath the name, a farmer walking beside a canal may never have called himself by the words later scholars use. A woman grinding barley in a courtyard may have known her world by city, household, temple, kin, and god. A scribe may have written in a language that carried prestige, tradition, and sacred memory, while hearing other tongues in markets and at city gates. Identity in this world was layered, practical, and alive. The tablets preserve voices, but not always faces. They give us names of workers, officials, kings, merchants, priests, musicians, slaves, and students. They tell us how much grain someone received, how many sheep entered a temple herd, how much silver changed hands, or which field belonged to which institution. Yet a rationalist does not tell us whether a man feared the dark, whether a child missed her father, or whether a singer believed every word of a hymn. This is the first mystery. The records are abundant, but human beings still hide inside them. Where did they come from? Some answers were imagined by the Sumerians themselves in sacred terms. Cities were not merely founded by people. Kingship descended from heaven. Divine powers assigned destinies. Temples belonged to gods before they belonged to administrators. In myth, the deep past was not empty. It was populated by beings, decrees, floods, wise figures, and memories of a time when the boundary between heaven and earth felt porous. Archaeology gives another kind of story. It speaks through pottery, house plans, burial customs, tools, irrigation traces, diet, settlement growth, and changing patterns of trade. It does not usually offer a single moment of arrival. Instead, it shows layers of development across centuries. Villages become larger, ritual centers grow more elaborate, labor becomes more coordinated, social differences sharpen, marks become signs, signs become writing, mud villages become cities with names that still echo, and yet the language remains unusual. Sumerian is not easily connected to the great language families around it. It stands apart, at least in the evidence available to us, like a stone set in a different pattern. This does not mean the people appeared suddenly, or came from nowhere. It means language has preserved a solitude that history cannot fully explain. In that solitude, curiosity gathers. Did they descend from earlier communities already living on the plain? Did groups arrive from nearby regions and merge into older settlements? Did several peoples become what later memory calls Sumer? The evidence resists a simple answer. Southern Mesopotamia was never sealed from movement. Rivers, marshes, steppe, mountains, and sea routes all brought people into contact. Farmers, fishers, herders, traders, prisoners, spouses, craftsmen, and servants could cross boundaries more quietly than armies. Over generations, a culture can form not from one origin, but from many acts of settlement, exchange, imitation, and adaptation. How did they rise? Not by miracle. Their ascent began with stubborn practical problems. Water had to be controlled, land had to be divided, labour had to be organised, surplus had to be stored, offerings had to be prepared, disputes had to be settled before they became violence. As communities expanded, memory alone became too fragile. A person could remember a promise, a household could remember a debt, but a city needed more. So clay became an instrument of order. At first, signs were close to things: grain, animals, containers, numbers. Officials needed to know what entered a storehouse, what left it, who worked, who received food, and what remained. But from such practical beginnings came something greater. Writing made absence less powerful. A command could travel, an account could survive, a name could outlast the mouth that spoke it. This is where history changes its texture. Without writing, the ancient world is known through objects, bones, walls, seeds, and scars in the land. With writing, the dead begin to speak in specific ways. They complain, they count, they praise, they boast, they mourn. A king may exaggerate his victory, but even exaggeration reveals desire. A student may copy a proverb, and in that careful repetition we glimpse a schoolroom. Discipline, boredom, pride, and fear of correction. Why did their world change? Because no human system remains still. Cities grow heavier as they succeed. Storehouses attract ambition. Temples accumulate land. Rulers turn protection into command. Families compete for status. Fields wear out. Canals demand endless care. Neighbouring cities measure one another's strength. Trade brings wealth, but also dependence. Writing preserves order, but also makes inequality visible, enforceable, and difficult to escape. The Sumerian world changed because it was alive. A living world absorbs pressure, and pressure leaves marks. In some texts, the city appears as a sacred household of the gods, where every task has meaning and every offering sustains cosmic balance. In other records, it appears as a system of work, ration, debt, punishment, and hierarchy. Both views are true in their own way. The same temple that fed the gods could manage labour with cold precision. This double image matters. It prevents the past from becoming too simple. Sumer was neither a paradise of wisdom nor merely a machine of control. It was a human civilization, luminous and harsh, inventive and anxious, beautiful and burdensome. Its people composed hymns of startling tenderness, carved seals of delicate grace, and imagined gods whose emotions resembled storms. They also fought wars, took captives, enforced labour, argued over land, and feared famine. What did they leave behind? At first, the answer seems to be ruins, city mounds, broken bricks, cylinder seals, statues with wide eyes, graves, bowls, tools, temple platforms worn down by weather. But the most powerful inheritance is less visible than stone. They left habits of civilization, methods for turning complexity into systems. They left records, measures, legal formulas, school traditions, myths, lists, and ways of imagining power. They helped teach later worlds how to remember. Their stories did not remain locked inside one age. Ideas moved through Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and other traditions. Myths were translated, reshaped, and echoed. Royal titles changed hands. Gods received new names or entered new families of belief. Scribal schools preserved old compositions long after daily speech had shifted. A language can die in the street and still live in the classroom, the temple, and the archive. That survival is haunting. It means Sumer did not vanish in a single silence. It faded unevenly, like light leaving a room while objects remain visible for a time. Spoken language gave way. Political power shifted. Cities rose and declined. But clay kept the impressions of hands, and those impressions carried a civilization forward in fragments. Some fragments are grand, others are ordinary. Together they form a world not recovered whole, but recovered enough to disturb the imagination. For every answer, another question waits. A name on a tablet may lead to a household may lead to a profession may lead to a temple, a field, a debt, a festival, or a war. The smallest mark can open toward a city. The city can open toward a landscape. The landscape can open toward questions of origin, power, memory, and loss. So the inquiry remains gentle but unfinished. Who were they? They were builders of cities in mud and heat. They were servants of gods and managers of grain. They were singers, soldiers, mothers, scribes, brewers, judges, boatmen, prisoners, and kings. They were people who lived close to water, under an enormous sky, in a land where survival required both imagination and discipline. Where did they come from? From deep human movement, local adaptation, old villages, unknown tongues, riverine labour, and centuries of mingling that cannot be reduced to a single path. How did they rise? By learning to organise the fragile gifts of water, soil, labour, belief, and memory. Why did their world change? Because success created weight, and weight created strain. What did they leave behind? Clay marked with signs, cities beneath dust, stories that travelled farther than the people who first told them, and in those signs and stories the outline of a lost world still visible in the dark. To understand the first deep roots of Sumer, the mind must travel into a landscape older than its cities. There are no tall temple terraces yet, no crowded streets, no scribal schools filled with the soft tapping of reed on clay. The southern plain lies open beneath a hard sky, still being shaped by water, heat, silt, and time. The land is young in a geological sense, restless and unfinished, built grain by grain from river sediment carried down from distant mountains. It is a world of edges. Fresh water meets marsh. Marsh gives way to mudflat. Mudflat dries into crust. Channels wander, split, vanish, and return. The horizon is low, and because the land is so flat, even a small rise can matter. A natural levee along an old riverbank may become a safe place to settle. A patch of slightly higher ground may decide whether a family survives a flood. In such a country, geography is never passive. The people who first learned this place had to read it carefully. They watched the colour of water. They knew the smell of wet earth before a rise in the river. They understood which reed beds hid fish, birds, and boar, and which pools turned foul in heat. They learned where clay could be cut, where fuel could be gathered, where animals might graze, and where the ground would swallow a careless step. Their map was not drawn. It was carried in memory. The climate did not offer easy kindness. The summers could be fierce, pressing down upon the plain till air shimmered above the ground. Shade became precious. Water became calculation. Winter brought cooler days, but not the steady comfort of reliable rainfall in every place where crops were needed. Unlike lands where rain alone could nourish fields, southern Mesopotamia demanded attention to the movement of rivers and channels. Life depended on timing. That dependence changed human behaviour. A single household could plant, herd, fish, gather reeds, and make tools. But larger control of water required cooperation. Banks had to be strengthened, channels had to be cleared, small ditches had to guide water to fields and away again. Work had to be repeated, because mud collapses, reeds invade, and silt fills what people carve. The land accepted human effort, but never permanently. This was one of the earliest lessons of the plain. Nothing stayed finished. A field won from marsh might flourish for a few seasons, then need repair. A settlement might grow secure, then face a change in channel or a season of poor water. A store of grain might promise safety, then attract pests, thieves, or obligation. The environment rewarded planning, but it also punished arrogance. Every success contained a future task. In the south, mud was everywhere. Mud made walls, floors, ovens, tablets, jars, seals, toys, and bricks, mixed with straw. It became the basic material of home and institution alike. Set under the sun, it hardened, exposed too long to rain and flood. It softened again. A house made of mud brick could shelter generations, but it also carried the knowledge of decay within its own substance. This had a quiet effect on memory. Stone monuments can seem to defy time. Mud brick buildings admit time into their bodies. They require repair, replastering, rebuilding, and renewal. A wall cracks, a room is filled, a new floor is laid above an old one. Human life rises in layers. The ground beneath a settlement becomes a record of repeated return, not one perfect act of construction. Reeds shaped life almost as deeply as clay. They grew tall along waterways, whispering in wind, sheltering birds and insects and providing material for mats, roofs, baskets, boats, fences, and screens. A reed could become a tool. A bundle of reeds could become shelter. A marsh could become both provider and obstacle. People who mastered reeds mastered flexibility, lightness, and speed in a landscape where heavy timber was scarce. But the marsh was not merely useful, it was mysterious. At dawn, mist could cover the channels until land and water seemed to exchange places. Birds cried from hidden places. Fish stirred below the surface. In narrow boats, people moved through corridors of green, seeing only a short distance ahead. Such places invite stories. They hide danger. They preserve secrets. They make the world feel alive with presences not easily named. Farther out, the open plain demanded a different kind of endurance. There, the sun found everything. Fields had to be coaxed from soil that could become rich with silt yet vulnerable to salt. When irrigation water evaporated under heat, minerals remained. Slowly, almost invisibly, salt could gather near the surface. It did not attack like an army. It appeared like a pale warning, season after season, turning fertility into a problem that people could delay but not always defeat. This slow pressure helped shape settlement itself. Communities had to shift attention from one field to another, adjust crops, maintain drainage, and think beyond immediate harvest. The land taught them that abundance was never separate from management. Barley, more tolerant of difficult soils than some grains, became essential. Dates offered sweetness, shade, and storage. Fish, sheep, goats, birds, and gathered plants widened the base of survival. The earliest communities were not isolated sparks in emptiness. They belonged to a web of older traditions. To the north and east, other peoples had long cultivated, herded, shaped pottery, built houses, and honoured the dead. Techniques moved gradually across regions. Ideas travelled with marriage, trade, migration, imitation, and necessity. The southern plain absorbed influences, but transformed them under local conditions. What worked in a rain-fed village had to be reimagined in a land ruled by channels. The land also created a strange intimacy between danger and opportunity. Floodwater could destroy a settlement, yet leave behind fertile soil. Marshland could block travel, yet provide food and reeds. Distance from stone and timber could limit building, yet encourage exchange. Harsh summers could exhaust bodies, yet favour careful storage and seasonal rhythms. In this way, hardship did not prevent civilization. It pressed people toward invention. There was no single moment when the world became Sumerian. Instead, there was a long gathering. Families learned to stay. Villages thickened. Shrines grew more important. Fields spread outward. The dead were placed beneath or near the places of the living, binding memory to ground. Tools became more specialized. Pottery styles changed. Seals and markings began to manage goods and identity. The ordinary acts of survival slowly produced structures larger than any one household could command. In the silence of those early centuries, one can imagine evening on a small settlement mound. Smoke rises from low roofs. A child carries a basket of reeds. Someone repairs a wall with wet clay, pressing palm marks into its surface. An old man watches the water level in a ditch. Women sort grain by fading light. A dog sleeps in dust. Beyond the settlement, frogs call from the marsh, and the sky deepens into violet. Nothing in the scene announces a revolution, yet the conditions of one are already present. Water needs order, labour needs coordination, food needs storage needs protection, ritual needs place, memory needs signs. The environment has begun to train the human imagination towards systems, and the people of the plain have begun to answer with habits that will outgrow the village. The lost world buried beneath Mesopotamia was born from this conversation between people and place, not from comfort and not from emptiness, but from a demanding floodplain where every gift required labour, every settlement required repair, and every season asked the same quiet question: can human beings build permanence in a land that never stops changing? In the early settlements of southern Mesopotamia, life began close to the ground. Morning entered through doorways made low against heat, dust, and wind. Inside the houses, the first light touched packed floors, storage jars, sleeping mats, baskets, grinding stones, and the quiet shapes of people rising from rest. The walls smelled faintly of clay and smoke. Outside, a rooster might call, a goat might pull at its tether, and the settlement would begin to stir in small human sounds. There was no sharp line between home and work. A courtyard could become a kitchen, workshop, drying space, animal pen, and place of conversation before the sun climbed too high. Women and men moved through tasks learned by watching older hands. Grain had to be ground, dough shaped, beer prepared, fibres twisted, nets repaired, reeds bundled, children fed, tools mended, and water carried. Survival was not one task. It was 1,000 repeated gestures. The body knew the rhythm of the day. Hands were calloused from stone, clay, fibre, and rope. Feet learned the feel of damp ground near water and hot dust away from shade. Clothing was practical, woven from wool or plant fibres, shaped for labour rather than display in most households. The smell of sweat, smoke, animals, and fermenting grain clung to daily life. Even the smallest home was part of a larger world of fields, canals, marshes, and obligations. Food anchored everything. Barley was central, humble and powerful. It could become bread, porridge, beer, ration, payment, offering, and measure of value. Dates brought sweetness and nourishment. Fish came from river and marsh, dried or eaten fresh. Their bones left in refuse layers that later ages would read like quiet signatures of diet. Sheep and goats gave meat, milk, hair, hides, and wool, birds, wild plants, legumes, onions, and oils added variety when seasons allowed. A meal could be simple but never meaningless. To eat was to take part in a web of labour. Someone sowed, someone watered, someone harvested, someone carried grain to a storage jar, someone ground it, mixed it, baked it, brewed it, or offered part of it to powers greater than the household. A bowl placed before a family carried the landscape inside it: mud, water, sun, animal, plant, and human effort met in the same vessel. Children grew inside this world of instruction. They watched adults more than they listened to formal lessons. A little girl might learn how to sort grain, twist fibres, shape small cakes, or comfort a younger child. A boy might follow animals, help clear mud from a ditch, carry fuel, or sit near a craftsman to observe the angle of a blade. Yet these roles were never as tidy as later categories suggest. Need could rearrange labour. A household used every capable hand. Play existed too. A child could turn a scrap of clay into an animal, a small cart, a figure, or a game piece. The same material that built walls and sealed jars could become imagination for a few moments in the dust. A reed stem could be a toy, a tool, or a stylus. The boundary between work and play was thin because children copied the serious world around them, testing it in miniature. Tools were modest, but they carried intelligence. A sickle blade set with small stone teeth could harvest grain efficiently. A grinding stone transformed hard kernels into usable meal, though at a cost to hands, knees, and backs. Needles, awls, scrapers, baskets, nets, hoes, spindle whorls, and simple blades reveal a culture of patient making. The objects were not silent to those who used them. Each had weight, texture, wear, and memory. Pottery gave shape to storage and time. Jars held grain, oil, beer, water, fish, and offerings. Bowls served meals and rations. Some vessels were plain, made for use. Others carried design, care, and social meaning. A potter understood clay differently from a farmer, though both depended on earth and moisture. The turning, smoothing, firing, and choosing of forms required skill that could be recognised across households and settlements. Trade entered even ordinary rooms. A bead of stone not found nearby, a shell from distant waters, a bit of metal, a fine vessel, or a seal impression could reveal connections beyond the immediate horizon. These objects did not need to be abundant to matter. Their presence told people that the world extended farther than their fields. They could become ornaments, gifts, signs of status, or tokens of relationship. A small bead might carry a long journey in its polished surface. Identity gathered around the household, but did not stop there. People belonged to kin groups, work groups, neighbourhoods, shrines, settlements, and perhaps to older memories of origin. A person might be known as someone's daughter, someone's husband, a skilled potter, a reliable herder, a difficult neighbour, a generous brewer, or a family with rights to certain fields. Reputation was a kind of invisible property, carried in speech. Speech itself filled the settlement. At dawn, people called across courtyards. In the heat, voices lowered under shade. At the water's edge, news passed quickly. Who was sick, whose animals strayed, which field needed help, which family had arranged a marriage, which elder had died, which trader had returned with strange goods. Before written records became common, community memory lived in the mouths of people, and spoken words could bind, wound, promise, or accuse. Ritual entered daily life without needing grandeur. A household might honour protective powers at a small place within the home. A family could place offerings for the dead, speak names, pour liquid, or leave food. Birth, illness, marriage, harvest, and death all invited gestures that joined the seen world to the unseen one. People did not live in a universe divided cleanly between practical work and sacred meaning. The two were woven together. Burial customs reveal this intimacy. Some dead were placed near the living, beneath floors or close to houses, wrapped with care and accompanied by vessels, ornaments, tools, or food. A grave was not only disposal, It was memory given a place. The dead remained near, part of the settlement's emotional geography. A child stepping across a floor might be walking above an ancestor. A house could shelter both breathing bodies and remembered ones. The dead asked questions of the living. What must be given? What must be remembered? What happens when the breath leaves? These questions did not need written theology to be powerful. They lived in gestures, offerings, tears, dreams, and fear. A burial bead, a bowl, a carefully positioned body, or a repeated rite suggests that the boundary between life and death was watched with tenderness and caution. Community gatherings brought another kind of energy. At certain times, people may have come together for feasting, collective labour, exchange, ritual, or decision. Food and drink could strengthen ties, display generosity, create obligation, and soften conflict. Beer, made from grain and shared in vessels, was more than nourishment. It was social warmth. Around it, stories could lengthen, disputes could be settled, songs could rise, and alliances could be remembered. Music and sound belonged to this world. Clapping, singing, reed pipes, drums, rattles, and work songs may have carried across courtyards and open spaces. A rhythm helps people grind, row, build, harvest, and mourn. A song can hold memory when no tablet exists. In a land where labour was repetitive and demanding, sound gave shape to time. It made the day less empty, and the group more whole. Yet intimacy did not mean equality. Some houses were larger, some goods were finer, some graves were richer. Some people commanded labour while others followed instructions. Differences in access, status, skill, family power, and ritual importance were already emerging. The settlement was not simply a circle of shared need. It was also a place where rank, influence, dependency, and ambition began to settle into recognizable forms. This quiet tension matters. A village can feel close and still contain rivalry. A household can share food and still struggle over inheritance, marriage, fields, animals, and honor. A shrine can unite people and also create authority around those who manage it. The earliest social world was warm with cooperation, but it was never free of pressure. Human closeness creates both care and conflict. As evening came, the settlement changed again. The heat softened. Animals were gathered. Smoke rose from cooking fires. People returned from fields, marshes, and paths beyond the houses. Tools were set down. Children grew drowsy. The smell of bread, fish, beer, and damp clay filled the air. Above the rooftops some stars appeared one by one, bright over the low plain. In that twilight, early society revealed its deepest strength. It was not yet the world of kings carved in memory or vast institutions claiming the labour of thousands. It was the world of households learning endurance, neighbours learning dependence, and communities learning how to turn water, grain, animals, craft, ritual, and memory into a shared way of life. The foundations of civilization were not built first in palaces. They were shaped in courtyards, beside ovens, at graves, along ditches, and in the patient hands of people whose names have mostly disappeared. Authority in early Sumer did not arrive all at once. It gathered slowly, like water behind a low bank. At first it may have appeared as trust, experience, sacred duty, or the practical need for someone to speak when many voices disagreed. A settlement that shared canals, fields, animals, walls, and shrines could not depend forever on memory and goodwill. Decisions had to be made, labour had to be arranged, conflicts had to be judged, offerings had to be prepared at the proper time. The first power was not always royal. It often wore the face of religion. At the centre of many communities stood a sacred place, perhaps modest at first, then larger, cleaner, more carefully built, and set apart from ordinary houses. Its floors were renewed, its walls were plastered, its vessels were selected with care. Food, drink, animals, wool, oil, and crafted objects were brought there as offerings. The shrine became more than a place of prayer. It became a place where goods collected, where duties were assigned, and where human work was gathered beneath divine authority. This changed everything quietly. A god did not plough a field with human hands, yet the god could own fields. A goddess did not count sheep in a pen, yet her temple could manage herds. The sacred household grew around an invisible owner whose needs were interpreted by priests, attendants, administrators, and specialists. To serve the deity was to enter a system that could command labour without appearing merely human. The storehouse became a powerful invention. Grain entered through one doorway and left through another. Jars stood in rows, baskets were weighed, animals were counted, wool was received, spun, distributed, and returned as cloth. Beer and bread were prepared for workers, festivals, and offerings. Each movement had to be remembered, and every remembered movement gave authority to those who controlled the record. A full granary speaks softly, but many people hear it. It can feed workers during canal clearing. It can support craftsmen who do not farm. It can provide offerings for gods, rations for dependents, and reserves against poor seasons. It can also create dependence. The person who receives grain from an institution does not merely receive food. He receives a place in an order, and that order knows his name, his task, and his obligation. Scribes emerged from this need for exact memory. At first, their work was close to accounting. Numbers, measures, animals, jars, fields, labour days, and deliveries had to be fixed in clay. The scribe's hand became an extension of institutional sight. What the eye could not witness directly, the tablet could hold. What the voice might forget, the sign could preserve. A mark pressed into clay could follow a worker farther than a shouted command. This was a quiet revolution of control. Power no longer depended only on presence. A supervisor did not need to stand over every field if an account could report what the field produced. A temple official did not need to remember every ration if a tablet carried the list. A dispute over delivery could be answered by clay. In a world of shifting water and mortal speech, writing made administration harder to escape. Yet authority still needed bodies. Canals demanded gangs of workers, and those workers had to be summoned, fed, watched, and dismissed. Mud brick walls required men to dig clay, mix straw, shape bricks, dry them, carry them, and set them in courses. Fields attached to temples or leading households needed plough teams, seed, harvest labour, threshing floors, baskets, and transport. Power became visible in rows of backs bending together. Organised labour changed the landscape. A ditch cut by a family served a family. A canal cut by hundreds could redirect a district. A wall built by neighbours protected a settlement. A platform raised by repeated labour could make a shrine visible from far across the plain. Once people saw what coordinated work could create, leadership gained a new language. It could point to a canal, a wall, a terrace, and say, "This is order made solid." But order is never innocent. To organise labour is also to decide whose time belongs to whom. Some people planned, others carried baskets, some measured rations, others waited to receive them. Some stood in shade beside records, others stood in mud under the sun. Even when the work served gods, fields, and community survival, the arrangement produced rank. Rank, once repeated, begins to harden. Councils may have played a role in early decisions. Elders, prominent households, ritual specialists, and experienced men could gather to settle matters that affected the whole community. A boundary dispute, a canal failure, a threat from another settlement, or a festival requiring large offerings might call for discussion. Such gatherings did not erase hierarchy. They gave it voices. They turned influence into procedure. In times of danger, another kind of leader grew important. The warrior, the organizer of defense, the man able to rally others at a gate or lead a raid across a boundary, gained status in ways different from priests and administrators. Fortifications did not build themselves. Weapons had to be made, stored, and distributed. Watchmen had to be assigned. Men had to be trained to stand together when fear moved through the streets. War and water worked together in shaping authority. A canal was wealth, and wealth invited conflict. A boundary ditch could become an accusation. A field watered by one city might be claimed by another. Livestock could be stolen. Trade routes could be threatened. In such conditions, Defense became part of governance, and governance became harder to separate from force. The leader who protected could also command. The temple remained central, but it was not alone. Large households gained influence. Lineages accumulated land, dependents, animals, and alliances. Skilled officials learned how to manage flows of goods. Ritual experts guarded sacred knowledge. Military figures controlled armed men. Power did not sit in one chair at first. It spread across institutions, families, offices, and ceremonies, then slowly tightened around those who could connect them. Titles began to matter. A title makes authority recognizable even when the individual changes. It tells others how to speak, obey, petition, and fear. A priestly office, a steward's role, a military command, a city governor's position, or an early kingship did more than describe work. It created expectation. The office could survive a body. It could be inherited, contested, expanded, and remembered. Law was also taking shape, not always as a written code in the grand sense, but as custom, judgment, compensation, oath, and precedent. A borrowed animal injured in use, a broken contract, a marriage dispute, a theft, a boundary conflict, or a debt unpaid all required resolution. The community needed ways to prevent private anger from tearing public life apart. Justice, however imperfect, became one of the authority's sacred masks. Oaths bound speech to the divine. A person who swore by a god placed his claim under supernatural witness. This made truth heavier. It also gave institutions a way to turn belief into procedure. A dispute could move from quarrel to ritualized judgment. The invisible world entered the settlement not only through prayer and offering, but through testimony, fear, and social trust. Taxes and obligations did not always look like coins or formal levies. They appeared as grain deliveries, labour duties, animals, wool owed, service owed, and participation in communal works. A household might owe days of labour to clear a canal. A field might owe a share of produce. A dependent might owe service to an institution that fed him. The economy of power was made from measured things and measured time. Fortifications marked another threshold. A wall around a settlement told the surrounding world that inside and outside were not the same. It required planning, labour, maintenance, and shared fear. It also made authority more visible at the gate. Who controlled entry? Who watched from above? Who could close the city at night, a wall protected? But it also defined the community as something guarded, bounded, and commanded. In the growing settlements, the sacred and practical remained tightly woven. A procession through streets could display divine favour, political order, economic wealth, and social rank in a single movement. Priests carried symbols, musicians sounded rhythm, offerings moved in public view. Officials appeared in positions of honour. The crowd watched, participated, and remembered. Ceremony taught people how the world was arranged. The rise of authority was not merely oppression, and not merely wisdom. It was a human answer to complexity. Too many fields, too much water, too many goods, too many disputes, too many dangers, and too many obligations could overwhelm a loose community. Leadership promised coordination, institutions promised memory, ritual promised legitimacy, walls promised safety, records promised control. Together they formed the first durable architecture of power. At dusk, one might imagine an official standing near a storehouse door. Workers file past with baskets. A scribe presses signs into clay. A priest prepares offerings within the sacred precinct. A guard watches the lane. In the distance, men are repairing a canal bank where water has begun to seep through. The city is still young, but it is no longer simple. Something new has appeared beneath the ordinary sounds of labour. It is the idea that society can be managed from a centre, that grain, people, gods, fields, walls, and memory can be drawn into a single order. From that idea grew temples, offices, armies, accounts, commands, and ambitions large enough to change the plane forever. A ruler enters Sumerian memory through a doorway made of shadow. His name is Gilgamesh, and the city around him is Uruk. He is not only a king in later tradition, he is a force of restlessness, a man shaped by strength, pride, fear, friendship, grief, and the desire to reach beyond the limits placed upon every human life. In the oldest imagination, he stands between history and legend, close enough to the ground to seem possible, yet enlarged until his outline touches the divine. Uruk itself is a fitting stage for such a figure. Its walls rise from the flat land like an answer to the open horizon. Its temples command sightlines above the roofs. Its streets hold merchants, labourers, priests, herders, craftsmen, singers, and scribes. Its gates open toward fields, canals, and roads where danger can arrive with little warning. A city like this needs a protector, but protection can turn heavy in the hands of one who does not know restraint. In the stories, Gilgamesh is magnificent but troubling. He's described as powerful beyond ordinary men, favoured by the gods, beautiful in form, and unmatched in energy. Yet his greatness disturbs his own people. A ruler who cannot sleep quietly can make an entire city restless. A king who tests every boundary may defend the walls from enemies, while also becoming a burden within them. Strength, without measure, casts a long shadow. This tension makes him more than a simple hero. He is a question in human form. What is power, for is a great king born to protect, to build, to conquer, to be praised, or to learn the cost of his own hunger? In a land where kingship carried sacred meaning, such questions were not abstract. They touched fields, households, temples, and bodies. A ruler's temper could become a public event. His ambition could become a canal, a wall, a war, or a grave. The people of Uruk cry out in the story, and the gods hear them. Their answer is not to destroy the king, but to balance him. From the wild places comes Enkidu, a being of strength and innocence, first living among animals, drinking at water holes, running with gazelles, and knowing nothing of city life. He is not made of palace training or scribal discipline. He belongs to open country, hair, dust, instinct, and freedom. Against Gilgamesh's urban power, he brings the memory of the untamed earth. Their meeting is charged with conflict. Two great forces collide in the streets of Uruk. The city becomes a witness. The struggle is physical, but it is also symbolic. The king meets someone who can resist him. The wild man meets the center of organized human life. Neither destroys the other. Instead, the contest becomes recognition. Rivalry turns into friendship, and friendship changes the direction of a life. This is the quiet turning point in the figure of Gilgamesh. He is still mighty, but he is no longer alone. Together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu seek deeds worthy of memory. They travel toward the cedar forest, a distant and sacred place imagined as fragrant, dangerous, and guarded. The journey moves away from city walls into a landscape of awe. Tall trees rise like pillars. The air is heavy with resin. Silence gathers under branches. Somewhere within that silence waits Humbaba, guardian of the forest, terrifying and appointed by divine power. The desire to cut cedar is not merely adventure. Wood was precious in southern Mesopotamia. Great timber did not grow in abundance on the flat alluvial plain. Cedar belonged to distance, mountains, foreign lands, and sacred spaces. To bring it back was to pull the far world into the city. A king who secured such material gained prestige, beauty, and evidence of command over routes beyond the horizon. Yet the act also carried unease. Sacred things do not yield without consequence. In the tale, courage and violation are close neighbours. Gilgamesh and Enkidu defeat the guardian. The cedar is cut. The heroes win fame, but the victory is not clean. A great deed leaves a tremor behind it. Something has been crossed that cannot simply be uncrossed. This is one reason the story remains powerful. It does not let glory remain untouched by doubt. It understands that ambition may bring splendor and shadow in the same breath. Then desire changes its face. The goddess Inanna, known in Akkadian tradition as Ishtar, looks upon Gilgamesh and offers him love. He refuses, and his refusal is sharp. He recalls the fates of her former lovers, each transformed, harmed, or diminished. The moment is bold, but dangerous. To reject a goddess is not like refusing a mortal. Divine anger moves through the world with terrifying scale, and pride has again brought the king near disaster. The bull of heaven descends. The earth splits. The city suffers. The divine realm has entered human space with violence. Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the beast, but victory cannot erase offense. The gods hold council. A price is demanded, not from the king directly, but from the friend whose presence had balanced him. Enkidu falls ill. His body, once wild and strong, becomes a place of helplessness. Here the king's story changes from fame to grief. Gilgamesh watches his companion die. The scene is quiet and devastating. No city wall can stop it. No royal command can reverse it. No strength can wrestle death to the ground and force it to yield. The king who fought monsters now faces stillness in the body of the person he loved most. Enkidu becomes motionless. Breath leaves. The heroic world collapses into one unbearable fact. Gilgamesh weeps, and his grief becomes fear. If Enkidu can die, then Gilgamesh can die. If strength ends in silence, what is fame worth? If cedar, battle, beauty, and kingship cannot save a body, then what remains? The ruler becomes a wanderer. He leaves the familiar city and moves through wild regions in search of Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood, a figure who knows a secret beyond ordinary human fate. His journey is an inward descent disguised as travel. He crosses terrifying spaces. He passes through darkness. He encounters beings at the edge of the known world. He reaches waters of death. He speaks to one who has survived a cosmic catastrophe and received a form of life denied to others. Yet the answer he receives is not the answer he wants. Immortality cannot be seized like timber. Death is woven into the human condition. There is a plant of renewal. For a moment, hope returns. Gilgamesh obtains it, imagining perhaps that age itself can be softened. That loss can be answered by a hidden gift from the deep. But while he bathes, a serpent steals the plant and slips away, leaving only the knowledge of what has been lost. The king returns without eternal life. He returns with empty hands, but not unchanged. Uruk receives him again. The walls remain. The city still stands under the sky. Its bricks, gates, and foundations become the answer left to him. Human beings cannot live forever, but they can build, remember, govern, teach, and leave marks behind. The king who chased immortality is directed back toward the work of the city. His legacy becomes not escape from death, but the shaping of a world that survives him for a while. This is why Gilgamesh matters in the Sumerian imagination. He is not only a ruler, he is the dramatization of kingship learning humility. He begins as overwhelming force and becomes a witness to limitation. He seeks fame, then permanence, then wisdom. His story understands the loneliness of power and the tenderness that can alter it. It knows that friendship can civilize strength more deeply than law. At night, in a scribal school centuries later, a student might copy lines about this king. The room is small, the clay is damp, the teacher watches. Outside, the city has changed, and languages have shifted. But the old figure remains alive in signs. A young hand repeats the grief of an ancient ruler, perhaps without fully understanding it. Still, the story passes onward. In Gilgamesh, Sumer preserved one of its deepest truths. The first great leader is never only the builder of walls or the winner of battles. He is the person through whom a society imagines the danger of its own power. He carries the city's ambition, but also its fear. He reaches toward heaven, travels through darkness, and returns to mud brick under the stars. And there, in the silence beside the wall of Uruk, greatness becomes mortal enough to be remembered. The first great triumph of Sumer was not one victory alone. It was the moment when the city became larger than its walls. Across the southern plain, settlements had already learned how to plant, store, pray, count, and defend. Yet something changed when one city began to imagine itself not merely as a home for its people, but as a power that could command neighbouring fields, sanctuaries, roads, canals, and memory. The city became an actor. It could desire, it could fear, it could strike. A boundary stone could become the centre of a crisis. Between rival city-states, Land was not an abstract possession. It was water, seed, yield, pasture, taxation, offerings, and survival. A strip of cultivated ground might feed households, fill temple stores, and confirm the honor of a god. To lose it was not only economic damage, it was humiliation. To seize it was not only expansion, it was a claim that heaven itself had tilted toward one city. In the early records of Sumerian conflict, one rivalry rises with unusual clarity. Lagash and Umma stand close enough to know each other's strengths, close enough to quarrel over fields, canals, and sacred boundary lines. Their dispute over the fertile Guadena plain became more than a local disagreement. It revealed how war, law, divine authority, and writing could combine into a new kind of historical consciousness. The conflict was not merely fought, it was recorded, justified, and displayed. The ruler Eannatum of Lagash emerges from this world of pressure. He's remembered as a warrior king who claimed the favour of Ningirsu, the powerful god of his city. In his inscriptions and monuments, battle is not described as random violence. It is presented as judgment. The enemy has violated an order, the god has commanded correction, the ruler has become the arm through which divine justice moves across the plain. This was politics made sacred, and it carried immense force. One monument preserves the mood of victory with haunting power. On the object often known as the Stele of the Vultures, arranged scenes show soldiers advancing in formation, bodies of enemies fallen beneath them, and birds gathering over the dead. The image is severe, controlled, and unforgettable. War is not shown as a confused struggle of individuals. It is shown as organized collective force, a city moving like a single body under command. This is a new development in the story of power. The men of Lagash do not appear as scattered fighters seeking personal glory. They are ranked, shielded, disciplined, and absorbed into something larger than themselves. Spears point forward, feet move together. The ruler stands not merely as a brave man, but as the focus of coordinated violence. The army has become an instrument of civic will. The battlefield itself can be imagined in the low light of morning. Mist lifts from irrigation channels. The ground is damp in places, cracked in others. Fields lie close by, perhaps recently trampled, perhaps already abandoned by workers who saw armed men gathering near the boundary. Standards rise above the ranks. Leather creaks. Bronze catches the sun. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone thinks of home. Someone knows he may not return. Then the formations move. The sound is not the roar of later empires, but it is terrible enough. Sandals strike earth. Spears shift. Shields knock against shoulders. Commanders call out. Sling stones may fly before the lines close. Men fall into mud and dust. A canal bank becomes an obstacle. A field edge becomes a killing ground. The same land that nourished barley now receives blood. Victory, when it comes, must be made meaningful. A battlefield triumph that fades into rumour is fragile. Lagash turns it into memory. The ruler's claim is carved. The god's role is proclaimed. The boundary is reasserted. The defeated city is shown as having broken sacred terms, and the winner appears as restorer of order. In this act, war and writing strengthen each other. The tablet and monument extend the spear, yet the victory also reveals anxiety. Why explain so carefully unless the claim might be questioned? Why invoke the god unless human possession needed divine weight? Why mark the boundary unless boundaries could shift again? The triumph of Lagash is not the end of conflict. It is a window into a world where every victory must be protected by ritual, record, and renewed force. The first major victories of Sumerian cities accelerated history because they created precedent. A ruler could now point to past conquest as proof of right. A temple could hold records supporting claims to fields. A city could preserve grievance across generations. Memory became political. The dead of one battle could be summoned into later disputes, not as bodies, but as arguments. Once conflict entered writing, it gained a longer life. War also changed the position of rulers. A leader who could defend irrigation works, recover disputed land, and bring back captives or goods gained authority beyond routine administration. He became protector, judge, avenger, and servant of the deity. Public victory strengthened his hand at home. Those who had doubted him had to reckon with captured standards, tribute, restored fields, and stories of divine favour, but success was expensive. An army requires food. Workers taken from fields reduce labour at critical times. Weapons need material from beyond the plain. Defeated lands must be managed. Prisoners must be guarded or absorbed. The wounded must be carried, mourned, or replaced. Every triumph produces a hidden account, and somewhere, scribes must reckon with the cost. Still, the glamour of victory was powerful. A city that won could expand influence over neighbouring communities. It could demand compensation, tribute, labour, or recognition. It could place its god at the centre of a broader sacred geography. It could boast that the world had been set right through its king. The psychological reach of such success may have mattered as much as the land itself. In the temples, offerings would follow. The god who granted victory must receive thanks. Animals could be sacrificed. Vessels could be dedicated. Captured goods might enter sacred storage. Songs could be sung. The ruler might present himself as humble before the deity, even while the ceremony proclaimed his exceptional power before the people. Ritual softened violence by placing it inside cosmic order. For the ordinary person, victory had a different texture. A farmer might regain access to a field. A widow might lose a husband. A craftsman might receive new work making weapons, carts, or offerings. A captive from the defeated side might enter a household or institution and begin life under a new name or status. Children might hear stories of the battle without seeing the bodies. Triumph could nourish one family and ruin another. This is why the first great victory should not be imagined only in bronze and banners. It lived in ration bowls, funerary offerings, repaired canals, rebuilt boundary markers, and anxious watches at the edge of claimed land. It entered lullabies and boasts. It changed marriages, debts, and the ambitions of the young men who saw that war could raise a ruler's name above others. A city learned that memory could be conquered as surely as fields. Across Sumer, other cities watched. If Lagash could record and sanctify its claims, others could do the same. If a ruler could bind army, god, inscription, and territory into one public statement, the political language of the plain had changed. Rival kings would not remain content with private strength. They would seek monuments, titles, victories, and witnesses. The struggle for land became a struggle for lasting narrative. In the heat of the afternoon, after battle, the plain would fall strangely quiet. Broken weapons lay near trampled grain. Birds circled above the dead. Survivors searched for kin, water, and shade. Officials measured what had been won. Priests prepared words of gratitude. Scribes prepared words of certainty. Yet certainty was always partly made. It had to be pressed into clay, carved into stone, recited before gods, and repeated until people believed it belonged to the order of the world. The first city triumph revealed a deeper transformation. Sumerian history had begun to move through named rulers, contested borders, divine claims, monuments of memory, and organized armies. The city had become not only a place to live, but a power that could wound, remember, justify, and dream of command. On the flat land between rivers, victory no longer vanished with the dust. It hardened into record. Expansion in Sumer did not always sound like marching feet. Often it sounded like wooden poles pushing boats through brown water, donkey hooves tapping along a dusty track, a merchant bargaining in a courtyard, or a scribe counting bundles of wool beneath the shade of a storehouse wall. Power moved through roads of grain and bronze, but also through oil jars, woven cloth, marriage agreements, temple gifts, and rumours carried from one city gate to another. The plain was becoming more connected. A city that grew strong could not remain satisfied with its nearest fields. It needed more animals, more workers, more timber, more stone, more metal, more allies, and more ways to secure the movement of goods. Local abundance created distant hunger. The larger a temple became, the more it required materials the land itself could not easily provide. The larger a ruler's ambition became, the farther his attention travelled. Textiles became one of the great engines of reach. Wool moved from sheepfolds into workshops, where it was cleaned and spun, dyed, woven, counted, stored, and exchanged. Women worked in large numbers in institutional production, their labour transforming animal fleece into cloth that could clothe bodies, pay dependents, honour gods, and travel as a valuable good. A folded textile might look soft and ordinary, yet within it were pasture, labour, administration, and trade. Grain also moved as power. Barley could feed workers digging canals, soldiers guarding roads, boatmen carrying cargo, and craftsmen shaping objects for elite households. It could be stored, measured, loaned, repaid, and converted into obligation. A city with reliable grain stores could act beyond the harvest season. It could summon labour for projects, support specialists, and survive temporary strain. In a dry year or a hungry season, grain became persuasion. Bronze changed the feel of distance. Copper and tin did not come together easily in the southern plain. They had to be obtained through trade routes stretching toward mountains, highlands, and distant lands. When combined, they produced tools and weapons harder and more durable than many earlier materials. A bronze blade, axe, chisel, or spear point carried within it an unseen geography. Its metal remembered miners, smelters, traders, guards, and roads. This gave distant places new importance. The mountains were no longer just a horizon, they were sources. The gulf was no longer just water, it was passage. Desert edges were no longer empty. They held routes, wells, and people who could guide or threaten caravans. A Sumerian city that wanted to grow had to think beyond itself, because survival and prestige depended on relationships with worlds it could not fully control. Trade was never purely peaceful. A merchant journeying with goods carried hope and risk in equal measure. He might pass through lands ruled by friendly leaders or suspicious ones. He might face tolls, theft, storms, disease, broken animals, or failed agreements. A cargo of textiles sent outward could return as metal, stone, timber, shells, or luxury goods, but it could also disappear into distance. Every trade route carried a question. Would the goods come back? Seals helped answer that uncertainty. A cylinder seal rolled across wet clay left an image that was both art and authority. It marked ownership, approval, identity, or institutional control. Its designs could show animals, heroes, banquets, divine figures, contests, and patterns of remarkable precision. When impressed on a lump of clay sealing a jar, door, basket, or document, it turned trust into something visible. The seal said that someone stood behind the transaction. Along with goods, styles travelled. A carved motif born in one place could appear elsewhere, altered by another hand. Pottery shapes moved. Metalwork techniques spread. Religious symbols crossed boundaries and gained new meanings. Even administrative habits could travel, because every expanding system faces similar problems. How much was sent, who received it, what was owed, what was promised. A technique that solved such questions in one city could be borrowed by another. Migration also shaped the expanding world. People moved for work, marriage, captivity, trade, herding, craft, service, and flight from hardship. Some arrived speaking different tongues. Some settled at the edges of cities, entered households, joined labour groups, or served temples and palaces. Over time, movement changed neighbourhoods without announcing itself as a grand event. A borrowed word, a new dish, a different style of ornament, or an unfamiliar personal name might reveal a wider world entering the city. Expansion could be formal or informal. A strong ruler might subdue neighbouring towns, place officials over them, demand tribute, or claim victory before his god. But influence could also spread through dependence. A smaller settlement might rely on a larger city's temple, market, protection, or irrigation network. It might imitate its measures, adopt its seals, send its goods, or honour its divine calendar. Domination was not always a siege. Sometimes it was gravity. The canals gave expansion a practical shape. Waterways carried more than irrigation. They carried cargo, workers, messengers, and military force. A canal linked fields to storehouses, villages to cities, and cities to one another. To control a canal was to control motion. It could nourish loyal land, starve a rival field, quicken trade, or delay an enemy. The politics of water became the politics of reach. Roads across dry ground mattered differently. Donkey caravans moved where boats could not. They crossed steppe, skirted marsh, climbed toward uplands, and connected river settlements with foreign resources. These journeys were slower, more exposed, and more dependent on negotiation with people along the way. At night, travellers might gather near a fire, animals hobbled nearby, goods wrapped tightly, while the stars burned over land that belonged fully to no city. Alliances could be as valuable as weapons. A marriage between leading families, a treaty sworn by gods, a shared ritual, or a mutual agreement over access to water might extend influence without open battle. Yet alliances were delicate. They depended on memory, honour, fear, and advantage. A promise made under divine witness could restrain ambition for a time, but not forever. When circumstances shifted, yesterday's partner could become tomorrow's threat. Rapid expansion also sharpened competition between cities. Each success by one ruler made others watch more closely. A new canal, a fortified outpost, a victory inscription, or a trade advantage could disturb the balance of the plain. Cities were close enough to know one another's prosperity. They could see the signs of wealth in imported stone, larger temples, fuller herds, finer metalwork, and more ambitious titles. Envy had geography. The gods travelled with this ambition. When a city expanded its power, the prestige of its deity often expanded with it. Offerings increased. Shrines received gifts. Divine names entered treaties and royal inscriptions. A ruler did not usually claim success as his alone. He carried the banner of a god, and victory confirmed the god's strength. In this way, political expansion became sacred expansion, and sacred expansion made politics feel inevitable. Yet every outward movement created inward pressure. More goods required more accounting, more labour required more supervision, more territory required more messengers, more wealth attracted more rivals, more captives required decisions about use and control, more trade meant dependence on routes that could break. A city that stretched outward also tied itself to uncertainty. Growth was both power and exposure. In a workshop near the centre of a thriving city, this wide world could be held in one room. A weaver works wool from local flocks. Beside her lies a bead of imported stone. A bronze tool rests near a clay jar sealed with an official mark. A basket contains dates from groves beyond the walls. A merchant waits outside with news of timber from far away. A scribe records the finished cloth. None of these things is isolated. Each is connected to routes the worker may never walk. That is the quiet wonder of Sumerian expansion. It turned a flat, difficult floodplain into the centre of a web. Mountains, marshes, deserts, seas, villages, temples, herders, soldiers, merchants, and scribes were drawn into patterns of exchange and command. The world did not become simple as it grew larger. It became more intricate, more dependent, more ambitious, and more fragile. Across the land, city gates opened each morning to movement. Boats slipped into canals. Donkeys were loaded. Workers entered fields. Traders checked seals. Guards watched roads. Priests received offerings from goods that had crossed great distances. In the rising heat, Sumer reached outward through every hand that carried, counted, traded, fought, promised, or prayed. Expansion was not only conquest, it was the widening of need. Order in Sumer became durable when memory learned to leave the body. A spoken command fades into air. A promise weakens when witnesses die. A debt can be denied. A boundary can be disputed. A worker can claim that he has already received his ration, or an official can claim that he has not. In a small household, memory may be enough. In a city of storehouses, fields, workshops, temples, dependents, and rival offices, memory begins to break under its own burden. Clay offered a solution. Wet clay was common, cheap, patient, and obedient to the hand. A reed cut from the water's edge could be shaped into a stylus. A sign pressed into the surface could remain after the voice disappeared. At first, the signs were close to counting and possession. Sheep, grain, jars, labourers, measures, deliveries. Yet from these practical marks grew a technology of rule, one that could hold a city together across distance, time, and suspicion. Writing did not begin as poetry, though poetry would come. It began with the pressure of administration. A temple needed to know how much barley entered a storehouse, how many sheep belonged to a herd, how much wool was issued to workers, and how much cloth returned to the institution. A palace needed to know who owed service, which lands produced what, and whether officials had fulfilled their duties. The sign on clay made the world countable. What could be counted could be compared. What could be compared could be controlled. This changed power in a profound way. A ruler's authority no longer depended only on his presence in a courtyard, or on the fear inspired by his guards. His authority could travel through a tablet. An order could be carried by a messenger. A receipt could bind a transaction. A sealed document could prove that goods had passed from one hand to another. The city gained a nervous system of marks, messengers, seals, and officials. Measurement became a language of obedience. Fields were surveyed, grain was weighed, labour was counted in days, liquids were measured in vessels. Silver could serve as a standard in transactions. Though much of life still moved through grain, wool, service, and obligation. To measure was not merely to describe, it was to place a thing inside an ordered system. A field without measurement could be argued over endlessly. A measured field could be taxed, leased, assigned, or seized. Numbers gave institutions sharper teeth. A worker who received barley as a ration entered a pattern that could be repeated and checked. A group assigned to canal labour could be listed. A herd could be inspected against records. A missing animal became not only a loss, but a discrepancy. The tablet created a world where absence itself became visible. Something should be here. It is not here. Someone must answer. Seals carried identity into this system. A cylinder seal was small enough to hold in the hand, yet powerful enough to stand for a person or office. Rolled over wet clay, it left a continuous image, a scene of animals, gods, worshippers, heroes, or patterned forms. The image could fasten a container, close a room, mark a transaction, or authorize a document. It joined beauty to accountability. To break a seal was to cross a line. Bureaucracy, though quiet, transformed daily life. It created people whose work was not to grow grain, herd animals, weave cloth, or shape metal, but to supervise, record, inspect, and decide. It separated planning from labour. It placed some men in rooms with tablets, while others worked under sun and dust. The administrator's tool was not the hoe or spindle, but the list. A list can seem harmless, yet a list can summon, exclude, reward, accuse, and remember. Schools rose to feed this system. A scribe was not born knowing signs. He had to be trained through repetition, discipline, and correction. In a tablet house, students copied lists of words, signs, professions, animals, gods, places, and measures. They practiced the order of knowledge until their hands could reproduce it. Learning was physical. The wrist pressed, turned, and lifted. Clay recorded mistakes as clearly as achievements. The schoolroom had its own atmosphere. One can imagine boys seated close together, clay tablets resting in their hands or on low surfaces, while a teacher watches with practiced severity. The room smells of damp earth, sweat, reed, and dust. Outside, city life continues. Inside, the future servants of administration learn that the world can be arranged in columns. The lesson is simple and immense. To write is to enter power. Law also became more durable through writing. Not every judgment needed a grand code, and custom remained important. But written agreements gave disputes a harder frame. A sale could be recorded, a loan could be fixed, a marriage arrangement could be witnessed, a field transfer could be marked before officials and gods. Written legal practice did not eliminate conflict. It changed the ground on which conflict stood. Oaths still mattered. The divine witness remained essential, because writing alone could not make people honest. A tablet could preserve a claim, but the fear of gods could make that claim sacred. In legal life, signs and ritual worked together. The hand pressed clay. The mouth swore. Witnesses stood nearby. The gods were invoked. Human society placed its fragile agreements beneath powers thought to see what mortals concealed. Taxation grew from the same need for order. The city had to feed workers, support temples, maintain canals, build walls, provide for festivals, equip soldiers, and reward officials. Grain, animals, wool, labour, and goods flowed inward from fields and households, then outward again as rations, offerings, wages, and supplies. The movement could seem circular, but it was not equal for all. At each point, someone counted, someone carried, and someone received. The army became more organised within this larger order. Weapons had to be produced, stored, repaired, and distributed. Men had to be summoned and provisioned. Campaigns required food, transport, intelligence, and chains of command. A battle might be decided in an hour, but the ability to place soldiers in the field rested on months and years of administration. Behind every spear stood a storehouse. Behind every storehouse stood a record. Architecture made order visible. Temples rose on platforms, their mass declaring that the gods had a fixed place among the people. Palaces and administrative buildings gathered officials, goods, and decisions under one roof. City walls traced a boundary between inside and outside. Streets guided movement. Gates controlled entry. Storehouses gave physical form to accumulation. Architecture turned abstract authority into something people could see each morning. Roads and canals connected the system. Messages moved along them, goods moved along them, workers moved along them, soldiers moved along them. Communication was not a luxury. It was the thread holding together fields, workshops, shrines, and offices. A delayed messenger could slow a decision. A blocked canal could interrupt supplies. An unguarded route could invite theft. Order depended on movement remaining predictable. Religion gave the system its deepest legitimacy. The city was not understood merely as a human arrangement. It was the household of a god, a sacred order reflecting cosmic order. The ruler served divine plans. The priest purified space. The offering sustained relationship with unseen powers. Festivals renewed bonds between deity and people. Administration, when placed within religion, did not appear as mere bookkeeping. It became service to heaven. Yet beneath the surface of order, tension always remained. A ration can feed, but it can also bind. A law can protect, but it can also favour the powerful. A tablet can preserve truth, but it can also preserve domination. A canal can sustain thousands, but it can also be controlled by those who decide whose field receives water first. The very systems that made Sumer strong also made inequality more exact. Still, the achievement was extraordinary. Sumerian cities learned to turn clay, numbers, seals, measurements, labour, belief, and architecture into an enduring framework. They created institutions that outlived individual rulers. They trained specialists to remember on behalf of society. They made power systematic. In the quiet rooms where tablets dried, civilization acquired a new kind of permanence. At sunset, the city's order could be heard in layers. A gate closes, a storehouse is sealed, a scribe smooths the edge of a tablet, a priest prepares a final offering. A watchman takes his place above the street. Workers return with dust on their legs and barley in their bowls. Somewhere, a teacher corrects a student's signs by lamplight. The day ends, but the records remain. In that stillness lies the invention of order. Not perfect order, not gentle order, a human order, fragile and forceful, made from clay and trust, fear and calculation, ritual and command. It allowed Sumerian power to survive beyond the breath of one official, one king, one witness, or one season. It gave the city a memory that could not sleep. At the height of Sumerian city life, dawn did not arrive quietly. It spread first along the upper walls of temples. turning mud brick gold before the streets below fully woke. High above the houses, the sacred platform caught the earliest light. Its stairways and terraces rose from the city like a man-made hill, a place where human labour reached upward and divine presence seemed to lean down. In the stillness before heat, the city appeared almost weightless. Then the sounds began. A door opened, a donkey brayed. Someone coughed in a courtyard. A baker stirred embers back to life. Water splashed into jars. Sheep shifted in pens near the edge of town. Children whispered, then shouted. The narrow lanes filled with bare feet, sandals, baskets, dust, and the smell of bread. From within the sacred precinct came preparations for offerings, careful and repeated. Because the gods were honoured through rhythm. The golden age of Sumer was not golden in the way polished metal is golden. It was made of clay, wool, barley, dates, oil, reeds, smoke, and labour. Its beauty lived in density. Houses pressed close together behind city walls. Courtyards opened to the sky. Roofs became evening spaces where families might breathe cooler air after a hard day. Doorways led into rooms where jars stood along walls, and mats lay rolled or spread on floors. Drainage channels carried wastewater away. Ovens glowed. Lamps flickered. The city was crowded, practical, fragrant, noisy, and alive. The marketplace gathered many worlds into one place. There were baskets of dates, onions, fish, grain, and wool. There were jars of beer and oil, bundles of reeds, simple tools, leather goods, woven cloth, beads, and small objects brought from far away. Sellers called out, buyers inspected, argued, touched, weighed, and hesitated. A merchant watched the mood of a customer as carefully as a farmer watched water in a ditch. Trade gave the city texture. A shell from distant waters might gleam at a woman's throat. A stone bead might pass through many hands before becoming part of an ornament. A metal tool in a craftsman's room might contain the memory of mountains. A carved seal might show images of gods, animals, and banquets. Then leave its mark on clay again and again. Objects travelled farther than most people, carrying hints of places beyond sight. Workshops formed hidden chambers of skill. The potter shaped wet clay into jars, bowls, cups, and vessels for storage, cooking, serving, and ritual. The weaver turned wool into cloth through long, repetitive motion. The brewer transformed grain into a drink both nourishing and social. The carpenter, where timber could be found, made doors, frames, furniture, carts, and tools. The metalworker brought fire and mineral together, coaxing usefulness from material that had crossed great distances. Every craft had its own music. The slap of clay, the scrape of a blade, the creak of a loom, the grinding of stone, the hiss of hot material, the low murmur of workers speaking while their hands continued. In these places, the greatness of the city was not announced by kings. It was assembled in fragments, vessel by vessel, thread by thread, brick by brick. Palaces and large residences stood apart in scale and atmosphere. Their rooms could hold officials, servants, guards, messengers, visiting dignitaries, records, food stores, and ceremonial objects. Authority needed space. It needed thresholds, courtyards, reception areas, storage rooms, and places where people waited before being admitted. A person entering such a building felt hierarchy in architecture itself. Each doorway narrowed possibility. Each guarded space reminded the visitor that power had an interior, yet the temple remained the great symbolic heart. Its god or goddess was not imagined as a distant idea, but as a living presence with a household to maintain. Food was prepared, incense burned, textiles were offered, statues were washed, clothed, adorned, and approached with reverence. The daily care of a deity required specialists and supplies. This sacred routine joined the labour of farmers, herders, bakers, brewers, singers, priests, and administrators into one visible act of devotion. Festivals changed the rhythm of the city. On such days, ordinary time opened. Crowds gathered in streets and courtyards. Music rose, Processions moved through public spaces with divine images, sacred emblems, offerings, and attendants. People who might spend most days bent over work could look up and see the sacred order passing before them. The gods were not hidden inside buildings alone. They moved through the city, and the city moved with them. A festival could be joyous, but also serious. It renewed relationships between gods, rulers, institutions, and people. It displayed wealth, discipline, and unity. It reminded every household that the city was more than a cluster of private lives. It was a shared cosmic arrangement, fragile and powerful, requiring offerings, songs, and obedience. The splendor of ceremony carried a message. The world continues because the rites continue. Gardens and date groves softened the harshness of brick and dust. Date palms gave shade, food, fibre, and beauty. Their crowns filtered sunlight into trembling patterns. Beneath them, smaller plants could grow in protected spaces. In courtyards and elite residences, greenery suggested control over heat and water, a small form of cultivated peace. A garden was never merely decorative in such a land. It was proof that water had been guided, soil prepared, and order sustained. Night gave the city another face. The heat lifted slowly from the walls. Families gathered in courtyards and on rooftops. Lamps burned in small rooms. Somewhere music continued after labour ended. Lovers met in secrecy. Guards moved near gates. Priests completed rituals. Scribes worked by lamplight when tasks demanded it, their tablets catching a reddish glow. Above the flat roofs, the moon rose, bright over the black mud of the land. The moon mattered deeply in cities such as Ur. Under its pale light, temple walls, river channels, and rooftops seemed transformed. The night sky was not empty space. It was a field of signs, watched by those who believed the heavens spoke through patterns, omens, and divine intention. A city under the moon was not asleep in a modern sense. It was held under a vast, observing order. Daily life at its height contained both abundance and fatigue. There were fine objects, elaborate rituals, trained scribes, skilled craftsmen, and institutions capable of remarkable coordination. There were also aching backs, ration lines, crowded rooms, illness, debt, lost children, dangerous childbirth, and fear of hunger when fields failed. The Golden Age was not a life of ease for most people. It was a life of intensity, supported by systems that could create beauty while demanding much from the human body. This is the quiet truth of Sumerian splendor. Its greatness depended on countless people whose names barely survive or do not survive at all. The woman spinning wool in a workshop, the boatman steering cargo through a canal, the porter carrying grain, the brewer stirring mash, the gardener tending palms, the singer learning sacred words, the child fetching water, the guard watching the gate, the scribe checking totals by failing light. Together, they made the city shine. At its height, the Sumerian city was a living instrument. Its walls enclosed danger and desire. Its temples joined earth to heaven. Its markets gathered distance into sound and colour. Its workshops turned raw material into value. Its festivals made power visible. Its households carried the private weight of love, hunger, quarrel, memory, and hope. Nothing stood alone. Every object and action belonged to a larger rhythm. For a while, the world seemed held in balance. Water reached the fields. Offerings reached the gods. Grain reached the storehouses. Boats reached the quays. Workers received rations. Children learned household tasks. Officials sealed doors at dusk. The moon rose above sacred terraces, and the city beneath it seemed ancient even to those who lived there, as if it had always stood between a river and sky. Above the black mud of Sumer, heaven was close. It did not seem distant, silent, or empty. It pressed over the land in layers of moonlight, stars, cloud, wind, storm, and burning sun. The sky was a realm of powers, signs, decrees, and hidden intentions. To look upward was not only to admire brightness, it was to face an order older than any city, an order in which human life was small, dependent, and constantly observed. The Sumerians imagined the universe as alive with divine presence. Gods were not vague spirits without shape or appetite. They had names, homes, duties, tempers, loves, rivalries, possessions, and terrifying authority. An was linked with the high heavens, Enlil with command, air, storm, and kingship, Enki with wisdom, fresh water, craft, and the deep, Inanna with love, battle, desire, splendour, and danger, Nanna with the moon, Utu with the sun, justice, and the clear seeing of day. Each god belonged to a larger sacred order. Cities honoured particular deities with special devotion, but the divine world was not local in any simple sense. A city god could protect a community, receive offerings, judge enemies, and carry the hopes of a people. Yet that god also belonged to a cosmic family of powers whose decisions shaped fertility, kingship, weather, victory, and death. The city was therefore not only political ground, it was a sacred residence. The temple made this belief visible. Within its precincts, the god was treated as a great being whose household required constant care. The divine statue, where the deity's presence could be approached, was washed, clothed, adorned, fed, and honoured through ritual. Food placed before the god was not an empty gesture. It affirmed relationship. It said that the human community remembered its dependence and accepted its obligations. But devotion contained unease. The gods were powerful, and power is never entirely comforting. They could grant abundance, victory, children, and justice. They could also send famine, sickness, defeat, sterility, or confusion. Their will was not always transparent. A person might perform the proper rites and still suffer. A city might honour its deity and still face disaster. This uncertainty gave Sumerian religion its emotional depth. Faith lived beside fear. Myth gave shape to this dangerous order. In stories, the gods create, desire, quarrel, decree, punish, and restore. They establish cities, assign divine powers, send floods, descend into the underworld, and determine the fates of kings and common people. A myth was not merely entertainment. It explained why things were as they were. It carried memory, theology, politics, and emotional truth in a form that could be sung, copied, and remembered. One of the deepest ideas was the ordering of destinies. The world was not imagined as random. Things had places, functions, names, and appointed roles. A city had a destiny, a king had a destiny, a canal, a craft, a temple office, a festival, and even a boundary could belong to a pattern sustained by divine decision. To live well was to act within that pattern, though no human being could fully see it. This made ritual a form of navigation, a sacrifice, purification, hymn, procession, prayer, or offering help to line human action with invisible order. The priest did not simply perform drama for a crowd. He tended the threshold between worlds. He knew words, gestures, timings, vessels, substances, and prohibitions. Mistakes mattered because rituals were not casual acts. They were technologies of sacred balance. Omens revealed another path toward hidden knowledge, a strange birth, a pattern in oil on water, the flight of birds, a dream, an unusual mark on a liver, an eclipse, or a troubling event in the sky could all be read as signs. The universe spoke, but not plainly. Specialists learned to interpret its language. They gathered experience into traditions, turning uncertainty into observation. The desire to know what the gods intended became one of the great engines of intellectual life. Education served sacred and practical worlds at once. In scribal school, students copied lists, proverbs, hymns, myths, legal formulas, and model texts. They learned not only how to write, but how to enter a cultivated inheritance. Knowledge was ordered in columns and categories: animals, stones, professions, gods, places, measures, and signs were placed into sequences that disciplined the mind. To classify was to imitate order, to copy was to preserve it. Social hierarchy also had a religious tone. At the top stood rulers, priests, high officials, and powerful households. Beneath them were scribes, merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, farmers, labourers, servants, dependents, and enslaved people. This hierarchy was not explained only by wealth or force. It was often wrapped in sacred language. Kingship, office, and ritual authority appeared as parts of a divinely sanctioned arrangement. Such belief could stabilize society, but it could also make inequality seem permanent. Gender roles were complex and varied by status, household, and institution. Women worked, managed households, wove textiles, brewed beer, bore children, mourned the dead, participated in ritual life, and sometimes held property or positions of religious significance. Goddesses could possess immense power in myth and cult, especially figures such as Inanna, whose energy crossed boundaries between love and warfare. Yet ordinary women also lived within constraints shaped by marriage, inheritance, labour demand, and male authority. The family was a sacred and economic unit. Marriage joined households, property, obligations, fertility, and reputation. Children continued the line, supported labour, and preserved memory. Ancestors remained emotionally important because the dead were not thought to vanish into nothing. They entered a shadowed condition requiring remembrance. The living could honour them with offerings, names, and care. To neglect the dead was to endanger the relationship between household and memory. The underworld was not a paradise of reward. It was often imagined as a dark, just dusty, inescapable place beneath the earth, where the dead existed in a diminished state. This vision gave urgency to life, burial, and remembrance. Human beings did not expect easy escape from mortality. Even kings and heroes faced the boundary. The best one could hope for was proper burial, lasting name, family offerings, and perhaps a place in the memory of the living. This gave writing a spiritual weight. A name written on clay could resist disappearance. A hymn copied by generations could keep a god's praise alive. A lament could give voice to loss after the mourners themselves were gone. A king's inscription could claim eternity, though the clay knew better. Writing did not defeat death, but it complicated silence. It made memory material. Moral thought moved through proverb, laws, hymns, and stories. The Sumerians valued justice, proper conduct, respect for gods, care in speech, loyalty, skill, and social order. Yet their texts also recognize human frailty. People lie, boast, envy, suffer, and make foolish choices. A proverb could be sharp and practical. A hymn could be tender. A lament could question why a city beloved by its gods had been abandoned. Their worldview was not naive. It knew the world could break. Sacred places gathered emotion around the landscape. A temple was not only a building, and city was not only a settlement. A canal could be blessed. A field could belong to a god. A gate could hold ritual meaning. The marsh, the steppe, the river, the storm, and the night sky could all become charged with divine suggestion. The physical world was readable, but never completely understood. At twilight, this worldview becomes easy to imagine. The sun lowers. Shadows lengthen across mud-brick walls. A family pours a small offering. A priest chants in the temple precinct. A scribe copies an old hymn by lamplight. A mother watches the moon rise and wonders what it promises. Somewhere, an old man dreams of the dead. Somewhere else, a diviner studies a sign and feels the weight of interpretation. In Sumer, the universe was not silent matter surrounding human ambition. It was a living structure of gods, signs, duties, limits, and fragile hopes. Human beings worked, loved, traded, argued, built, and mourned within a cosmos that seemed to watch them from above and receive them below. The black mud fed their bodies. The heavens shaped their fears. Between earth and sky, they made meaning from ritual, story, memory, and clay. At its greatest reach, Sumerian power felt as if the world could be held in clay. The cities stood under a bright and pitiless sky, their walls rising from the plain, their sacred towers visible across fields and canals. Boats arrived heavy with grain, wool, oil, timber, metal, stone, and luxury goods. Donkeys entered through gates carrying burdens from distant roads. Messengers moved between rulers, temples, and officials in storehouses. Scribes counted what the land had yielded and what human hands had made. Confidence had become a habit. A city with full granaries and honoured gods could look beyond its own roofs and imagine authority extending over fields, villages, waterways, shrines, and rival towns. Its ruler could claim that order flowed from his command. Its priests could declare that divine favour rested within its temples. Its scribes could press signs into tablets and make agreements endure beyond a single conversation. The city seemed to possess not only strength, but memory. There is a special kind of power in being able to record. A victory could be named, a canal could be credited, a boundary could be fixed, a temple gift could be preserved, a labour force could be assigned, a king could state what he had done, who commanded him, which gods supported him, and which enemies had fallen beneath his authority. The written claim did not merely describe power, it performed power. It made the ruler's voice continue speaking when he was absent. At this height, Sumer was not a silent collection of ruins and legends. It was a living contest of cities. Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, Umma, Larsa, Kish, and others each carried prestige, rivalry, sacred identity, and political ambition. Some cities were famed for their gods, some for rulers, some for wealth, some for ancient sanctuaries. Nippur held a special religious importance because of Enlil, whose authority was bound to kingship and cosmic command. To control or honour such a centre was to touch the symbolic heart of the land. Power needed sacred recognition. A ruler might win battles and command workers, but legitimacy became deeper when tied to a revered sanctuary. If the gods had granted kingship, then kingship had to be shown in forms the people could understand. Offerings, temple rebuilding, inscriptions, festivals, and gifts all turned political strength into sacred proof. A ruler who restored a shrine could appear not as a conqueror alone, but as a caretaker of cosmic order. This was the age of monumental gestures. Temples were rebuilt on older foundations, each renewal lifting sacred memory higher. Platforms grew, courtyards expanded, walls were repaired, adorned, and dedicated. Bricks sometimes carried stamped inscriptions, repeating royal names across surfaces that no eye would always see. Even hidden bricks could speak to gods, to future builders, and to the idea that power should be embedded in the city itself. To build was to claim time. A canal was more than engineering. It was a promise that fields would drink and workers would eat. A city wall was more than defence. It was a line drawn against chaos. A temple terrace was more than architecture. It was a statement that the god's house stood secure above the ordinary dust. A ruler who built did not merely improve a city, he placed himself inside its memory. The reach of Sumerian influence could be measured in objects. Tablets carried administrative habits across institutions. Seals travelled with merchants and officials. Sumerian language lived in school exercises, hymns, royal praise, and learned tradition. Weights and measures helped regulate exchange. Artistic styles, mythic images, ritual forms, and scribal practices moved beyond the narrow homeland of the southern cities. Influence did not always require direct rule. It could enter another society through usefulness, beauty, prestige, and imitation. The scribal world gave Sumer a power unlike armies. A trained scribe could preserve old songs, compose new praise, calculate rations, copy lexical lists, record legal agreements, and serve the machinery of temple and palace. Such people formed an invisible elite of memory. Their work connected divine hymns with warehouse accounts, school discipline with royal ambition, and mythic past with immediate need. Through them, the world became readable in orderly marks. In the strongest cities, abundance appeared carefully arranged. Storehouses held grain in measured quantities, textile workshops produced cloth in disciplined cycles, herds were counted and managed, fields were assigned, workers received rations according to status, task, and institution. The city's wealth did not lie only in piles of goods, but in the ability to move goods through predictable channels. Power was circulation under command. The court added splendour. A ruler's residence could gather officials, envoys, guards, musicians, servants, craftsmen, and petitioners. There were audiences where words had to be chosen carefully. There were gifts exchanged with deliberate meaning. There were feasts where food, drink, music, rank, and loyalty blended into ceremony. A cup passed in such a room could carry political weight. A seat near the ruler could become a visible measure of favour. War remained close to this confidence. Armies could be assembled, captives taken, rival boundaries pressed, and old claims revived. A ruler at maximum power rarely imagined his city as merely defensive. He saw weakness beyond his border, an opportunity in another city's disorder, yet warfare was always wrapped in explanation. The enemy had failed, rebelled, violated, insulted, withheld, or trespassed. Victory needed a moral shape before it entered memory. Still, the strongest power often hides its weakness most successfully. Beneath full storehouses lay dependence on harvests. Beneath royal titles lay rival families. Beneath divine claims lay political calculation. Beneath the scribal order lay thousands of workers whose labour made the system breathe. Beneath the confidence of monuments lay mudbrick, vulnerable to weather, neglect, and violence. The city looked permanent because so many hands repaired it every day. Maximum power is not the same as peace. It is a state of high tension held in balance. The ruler must satisfy gods, officials, soldiers, workers, allied elites, temple households, and ambitious relatives. The fields must produce. The canals must function. The storehouses must remain stocked. The scribes must record correctly. The merchants must return. The borders must be watched. A single city at its strongest point is like a loaded boat moving through shallow water, impressive, useful, and always at risk of grounding. Yet to those living within the moment, the fragility may not have been visible. A priest climbing toward a shrine at dawn might see smoke rising from countless homes and believe the god city was secure. A merchant counting sealed jars might feel that prosperity had become normal. A young scribe mastering difficult signs might imagine that the old language of learning would continue forever. A king standing before a newly dedicated temple wall might believe his name had entered permanence. This confidence shaped the emotional landscape. People looked at temples and saw continuity. They saw walls and felt protection. They saw processions and felt order. They saw written tablets and trusted that obligations could be held firm. They saw imported goods and sensed that the world beyond the plain acknowledged their cities. Wealth does not only fill rooms, it alters imagination. It teaches people to expect tomorrow to resemble the height of today. In the evening, the strongest city glowed with layered life. Fires flickered in homes, guards paced walls, officials sealed storerooms, musicians played in elite rooms, workers ate from ration bowls, sacred lamps burned near divine images. The moon lifted above terraces, and the canals reflected broken light. Somewhere, a scribe set a tablet aside to dry, leaving in clay the impression of a world convinced of its own weight. At such a moment, Sumer seemed vast not because it covered endless territory, but because it had learned to compress distance, labour, belief, and memory into systems of remarkable depth. It could summon grain from fields, goods from roads, prayers from temples, names from tablets, soldiers from households, and meanings from myths. The world was not truly held in clay, but for a while it could seem that way. The first cracks in Sumerian power did not always announce themselves with noise. They appeared in ledgers, in weakened fields, in rival claims, in unpaid debts, in uneasy courts, and in canals that required more labour each year to keep water moving. A city could still look strong from a distance. Its walls could stand. Its temples could receive offerings. Its rulers could speak in the language of divine favour. Yet beneath this surface of order, strain gathered like seepage behind a riverbank. The land itself carried part of the burden. Irrigation had made dense settlement possible, but irrigation was never a simple gift. Water brought life, then left minerals behind as it evaporated under the heat. Over time, salts rose through the soil. Some fields grew less generous. Barley tolerated difficult earth better than many crops. But even barley could not turn every damaged field into abundance. A farmer might look across pale ground and feel a quiet dread no army could match. Decline can begin as a whitening of the soil. It can begin when harvest baskets are lighter than expected. It can begin when a household still owes what it promised, though the field has not produced enough. It can begin when officials demand the same amount from a poorer harvest, because temples, palaces, workers, soldiers, and rituals do not easily reduce their hunger. Institutions built on surplus suffer deeply when surplus thins. Debt followed the weaker harvest like a shadow. A family might borrow grain during hunger, promising repayment after the next season. A farmer might pledge labour, land use, animals, or even family members under pressure. What began as a temporary measure could become a trap. The language of obligation grew heavy. A name written on a tablet could preserve a promise, but it could also preserve distress. Clay remembered what hunger wished to forget. Inequality sharpened in such conditions. Powerful households could survive bad seasons more easily than poor ones. Temples and palaces could absorb, seize, or manage land that smaller families could no longer hold. Officials close to records and redistribution could benefit from systems designed to organize the city. Those who lived by rations or debt had less room to breathe. The city still depended on their labor, yet offered them less freedom. This kind of weakness is dangerous because it hides inside routine. The scribe still writes. The worker still receives a ration. The priest still makes offerings. The ruler still speaks proudly. But the human feeling beneath the acts has changed. A man clearing a canal may no longer believe the system protects his household. A woman weaving for an institution may know that her work sustains wealth she will never touch. A debtor may hear divine order in public ceremonies and feel only private fear. Political rivalry added another weight. Sumerian cities were close enough to compete constantly, yet strong enough to resist easy absorption. Each had its god, elite families, territorial claims, memories of insult, and ambitions disguised as justice. A ruler who wished to strengthen himself might revive an old boundary dispute, seize a water channel, demand tribute, or claim to restore a sacred order violated by others. War could be presented as necessity, but often necessity served ambition. Succession could turn ambition inward. A ruler's death opened dangerous questions. Which son, brother, relative, general, priestly ally, or favoured official had the strongest claim, was the heir mature, respected, and divinely approved? Were the city's leading families united or waiting for advantage? In a world where kingship carried sacred weight, a disputed succession was not merely a household quarrel. It could threaten the cosmic dignity of the city itself. Court life could become a chamber of whispers. Behind public ceremonies stood private calculations. Officials watched one another. Priests guarded influence. Military leaders measured loyalty among armed men. Elite families arranged marriages, gifts, and alliances to strengthen their positions. A ruler might depend on advisors who served him carefully in public and tested his weakness in private. Power gathered people around it, and people brought desire with them. Corruption was not always a dramatic theft. It could be a measure adjusted slightly, a delivery recorded favourably for one family, a ration reduced for those without protection, a field assigned to a relative, a dispute judged in favour of the influential, a temple office used to enrich a household. The system did not need to collapse for injustice to grow. It only needed enough people to believe that records could be bent and authority could be purchased. Overexpansion placed further strain on city institutions. Influence over villages, fields, canals, and neighbouring districts required supervision. Supervisors required rations and authority. Roads required security. Captives required management. Troops required food. Messengers required reliable routes. Every new responsibility created more need for counting, storing, commanding, and enforcing. A ruler might celebrate wider reach, while administrators quietly struggled to make that reach practical. There was also exhaustion in the body of the city. Mud brick walls needed repair. Temple platforms needed rebuilding. Canals silted up. Drains clogged. Storehouses required maintenance. Boats cracked. Tools wore down. Animals died. Workers aged. Children replaced adults only after years of feeding and training. Civilization can look magnificent from above, but from within it is endless repair. When repair falls behind, order begins to fray. The people may have felt this in small ways first. A canal cleaning took longer than expected. A ration arrived late. A dispute remained unresolved. A gate guard demanded more than custom allowed. A priest announced a festival that required offerings from already strained households. A merchant failed to return with expected goods. A field boundary once accepted became contested again. None of these moments alone destroyed a city. Together, they changed the mood. Mood matters in history. A confident city can endure hardship because people believe hardship has meaning. A tired city sees the same burdens differently. Labor becomes resentment. Tax becomes extraction. Ritual becomes demand. Law becomes a tool of the strong. Even sacred language can lose some warmth when the hungry hear it from mouths well fed. The gods may remain powerful, but human trust grows thinner. The scribble record preserves traces of attempts at reform. Rulers at times proclaimed justice, debt relief, restoration of order, protection of the vulnerable, or correction of abuses. Such declarations reveal compassion, strategy, and danger at once. One does not announce a cleansing of injustice unless injustice has become visible enough to require public answer. Reform shows that a society still has tools. It also shows that something has gone wrong. There is a quiet poignancy in this. The same systems that made Sumerian cities remarkable also made them vulnerable to their own complexity. Writing could protect agreements, but also imprison debtors. Temples could feed communities, but also accumulate wealth. Kings could defend fields, but also drain households through war. Canals could bring fertility, but also salt and conflict. Order, once built, demanded constant payment. At dusk, imagine a tired official standing near a canal bank. The water is low, mud has collapsed along the edge, workers wait with baskets, their faces drawn in the fading heat. A messenger arrives from the city with another instruction. A farmer argues that his field has received too little water. A temple agent insists that the offering grain must still be delivered. In the distance, the sacred platform glows in the last light, serene and beautiful. The scene is not collapse, it is strain. That distinction matters. Sumer did not weaken because its people forgot how to build, write, farm, pray, or govern. It weakened because the demands placed upon land, labour, authority, and belief grew heavier than the balance could easily bear. The cracks in the canal banks were also cracks in trust, in soil, in politics, and in the promise that order could hold every pressure within its walls. And in the deepening evening, the city still worked, still prayed, still counted, and still hoped that the waters would rise clean again. Threats gathered at the edges of Sumer like storm clouds beyond a flat horizon. Some came from within the cities themselves. Some came from steppe, highland, desert route, and northern kingdom. Some moved with armies. Others moved more quietly, through hunger, broken trade, weakened loyalties, and the slow exhaustion of people asked to carry too much for too long. A civilization rarely faces only one danger at a time. Pressure arrives in layers. The first layer was resistance. When rulers demanded labour, grain, loyalty, soldiers, and obedience, not every community answered willingly. Villages might delay deliveries, workers might flee assignments, dependent people might seek protection from rival households. Captives might resist their new masters. A city under pressure could become watchful of its own people, aware that order on tablets did not always mean order in hearts. Rebellion could begin with silence. A field left untended, a canal crew arriving late, a town refusing tribute, a governor hesitating before obeying a command, a priestly faction lending support to another claimant. These small refusals could gather force when central power seemed weak. Once people sensed that authority could be resisted, fear began changing sides. The ruler still had titles, but titles had to be enforced by men, food, and belief. Borderlands made control uncertain. Between city fields and open steppe, settled farmers met mobile herders whose lives followed animals, seasons, wells, and grazing. They traded, intermarried, hired out labour, exchanged animals, and sometimes raided. To city officials, these groups could appear unstable, hard to count, and difficult to bind. To people of the steppe, the cities could appear wealthy, demanding, and vulnerable behind their own confidence. The Amorites became one of the great names attached to this pressure. They were not simply invaders in a single dramatic wave. They were mobile and semi-mobile peoples from western regions who entered Mesopotamian life through movement, service, settlement, military employment, and political opportunity. Some were seen as outsiders, some became insiders, some threatened cities, some ruled them. The boundary between foreign and familiar could change within a generation. This made the danger more subtle. An enemy outside the gate is easier to imagine than a new power already woven into households, armies, labour groups, and alliances. A man whose father was called foreign might serve a local ruler. His son might command troops. His grandson might claim kingship. Cultures do not meet only in battle. They also meet in marriages, names, food, contracts, wages, and shared danger. From the north came another memory of force. Akkadian power had shown that the cities of southern Mesopotamia could be drawn under wider rule. Under kings such as Sargon and his successors, political imagination expanded beyond the old pattern of rival city-states. Armies moved across regions, governors administered conquered cities. Royal inscriptions spoke with a scale larger than local rivalry. The south learned that dominance could come not only from a neighbouring city, but from a wider imperial machine. Imperial power brought order and disruption together. It could protect routes, standardize obligations, and connect distant regions. It could also extract tribute, appoint outsiders, strain local elites, and provoke resentment. A city that once negotiated with its rivals now had to answer to kings who imagined authority across lands, languages, and gods. Local pride did not vanish under such rule. It waited, watched, and remembered. When imperial strength weakened, rebellion followed. Cities that had bowed could rise again. Governors could be rejected. Local rulers could reclaim old titles. Temples could renew civic identity. Yet freedom after empire did not always bring peace. It often brought a crowded field of ambitions, each city seeking security before another could dominate it. Liberation can resemble disorder when too many powers reach for the same inheritance. External threats also came from highlands. Groups from the Zagros and beyond could descend into the Mesopotamian world, drawn by wealth, opportunity, weakness, or pressure in their own lands. Highland peoples knew terrain that lowland armies could find difficult. They moved through passes, valleys, and broken ground where city-trained forces might struggle. To the lowland imagination, mountains were both sources of precious goods and homes of danger. Trade disruption intensified fear. A city dependent on copper, timber, stone, and other imported goods could not ignore instability beyond its fields. If a route became unsafe, tools became harder to produce. If merchants failed, elite display suffered. If metals grew scarce, weapons and prestige objects became more costly. A broken road could echo inside a workshop. A distant conflict could be felt in an empty storeroom. Climate and environment deepened the pressure. When river behaviour shifted, rains failed in key regions, harvest weakened, or pasture conditions changed. People moved. Herders sought new grazing. Farmers abandoned poor land. Hungry communities became harder to govern. Environmental stress does not always announce itself as disaster in one season. It can act through migration, prices, disputes, disease, and the nervous movement of families searching for survival. The canals became vulnerable arteries. An enemy did not need to destroy an entire city to harm it. To block, divert, damage, or seize water was to threaten fields, food, and morale. A breached levee could flood land at the wrong time. A neglected channel could leave crops thirsty. Control of water turned every conflict into something more intimate than a battle line. It reached into bread ovens and ration bowls. In the streets, fear took ordinary shapes. A mother might hear that men were being summoned for service and wonder who would tend the field. A merchant might delay a journey because roads had become unsafe. A scribe might record emergency grain distributions with careful signs, while knowing the storehouse was lower than it should be. A priest might perform rites for protection as rumours moved faster than messengers. Rumour itself was a force. People heard that one city had rebelled, another had been punished, another had opened its gates, another had lost its fields, another had made terms with outsiders. Some stories were true, some were sharpened by fear. In a world without instant certainty, rumour could change behaviour before armies arrived. It could empty roads, panic markets, and weaken confidence in rulers who seemed slow to respond. Ideological conflict added another dimension. When rulers claimed divine backing, defeat became spiritually dangerous. Had the god abandoned the city, had rituals failed, had enemies gained favour, had the ruler offended heaven? Such questions mattered, because political authority rested partly on sacred trust. A military loss could become a theological wound, a famine could become accusation, a captured statue or damaged shrine could shake the emotional foundation of a people. Revolt and invasion often fed one another. An external enemy might support a local faction. A rebellious city might invite outside help. A defeated ruler might hire foreign warriors. A border group might exploit civil dispute. Once the centre weakened, every dissatisfied group found new possibilities. The old order did not simply face enemies. It created openings that enemies could enter. Yet even in danger, life continued. People still planted where they could. Boats still moved when waterways were safe. Families still arranged marriages. Children still learned trades. Priests still lit lamps. Scribes still pressed signs into clay. The endurance of ordinary life is one of history's most moving truths. People do not stop living because the horizon darkens. They continue until continuation itself becomes impossible. Imagine a night near the edge of a Sumerian city. The gate is closed earlier than usual. Guards listen beyond the wall, inside. Courtyards are dim. A family speaks in low voices over a thin meal. At the temple, prayers rise for protection. In an administrative room, tablets lie stacked beside a lamp, each one confident in its columns while the world outside grows less predictable. Somewhere in the distance, animals move across the dark plain. The danger is not one army only. It is the convergence of resentment, migration, ambition, environmental strain, failing trust, and rival power. It is the moment when systems designed to hold the world together begin meeting forces they cannot fully absorb. The cities still possess walls, gods, records, and courage. But the edges are pressing inward, and every gate, canal, road, and oath has become a place where the future trembles. The end of Sumer did not come as one final silence. It came as transformation. Cities weakened, rulers changed, languages shifted, and old institutions passed into the hands of people who inherited more than they destroyed. The southern plain did not empty in a single breath. Fires still burned in houses, boats still moved along canals, priests still approached sacred rooms, scribes still copied ancient signs. Yet the world that had once spoken in Sumerian as a living civic of voice was slowly becoming something remembered, studied, and preserved. This is one of history's quietest forms of disappearance. A city may fall by storm, but a language may fade by household. A political order may break under invasion, but a tradition may remain in schools long after children no longer hear it spoken in markets. The Sumerian tongue, once used to praise gods, count grain, instruct students, and celebrate rulers, gradually withdrew from ordinary life. It did not vanish entirely. It became learned, sacred, literary, and old. To lose a spoken language is to lose a way of breathing. Words that once passed easily between neighbours become difficult signs on a tablet. A phrase once understood by a child becomes an exercise for a student. Songs that once belonged to public feeling become treasures of scribal tradition. The change is subtle, but enormous. A civilization can survive in writing while becoming unreachable in daily speech. The cities themselves carried the marks of exhaustion. Some canals failed or shifted. Some fields became less productive. Some temples were rebuilt by rulers who spoke other languages and claimed other political inheritances. The mounds grew higher as generations laid new floors over old floors, new walls over broken walls, new memories over older ones. Ruin and renewal lived together. A collapsed room might become the foundation of another life. Ur, Uruk, Nippur, Eridu, Lagash, and other names did not simply dissolve from the map. They continued to matter at different times, sometimes as sacred centres, sometimes as cities under new rulers, sometimes as places of memory. Their gods entered wider Mesopotamian religion. Their old hymns were copied. Their myths were retold in new languages. Their scribal form shaped the education of the later elites. Sumer lost political independence, but its imagination travelled inside the civilizations that followed. This is the strange afterlife of power. The conqueror may take the city, but the city may educate the conqueror's children. A new king may rule from a throne built over older foundations, yet he may still depend on inherited rituals, inherited titles, inherited measures, and inherited writing. The past does not always resist by force. Sometimes it survives by becoming necessary. Sumerian myths proved especially durable. Stories of creation, divine order, sacred kingship, the great flood, the descent to the underworld, and the restless search for lasting fame continued to echo through Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian traditions. They were translated, adapted, expanded, and reinterpreted. A tale that began in one sacred landscape could cross centuries wearing new names, while still carrying an older emotional structure beneath the surface. Law and administration also left deep marks. Later, Mesopotamian societies inherited habits of record-keeping, contracts, seals, accounting, legal formulae, and bureaucratic discipline. The idea that a complex society could be managed through written obligations became one of Sumer's most powerful legacies. It was not glamorous, it was not always gentle, but it changed the history of government, economy, justice, and memory. In this sense, clay became more enduring than kingship. A royal palace could burn, a dynasty could fail, a statue could be broken, a wall could crumble into dust, but a tablet, once dried or fired, could sleep under the earth with patient stubbornness. It might preserve a hymn of beauty, a schoolboy's lesson, a field sale, a ration list, a lawsuit, a proverb, or a cry of grief from a ruined city. Each fragment kept one small doorway open. The ruins waited a very long time. Wind moved over the mounds. Grass grew after rain, then withered. Shepherds passed with animals. Later, peoples walked across buried streets without knowing the names of those below. The rivers changed their courses. Sand and silt filled rooms where lamps had once burned. Bricks returned toward the mud from which they had been shaped. The great cities became rises in the land, quiet under the sun. Yet silence was not emptiness. Under the surface lay walls, drains, graves, ovens, broken vessels, seals, tools, and tablets stacked in rooms or scattered by collapse. The earth kept what memory had lost. When later hands uncovered these things, the world beneath Mesopotamia did not appear as a fantasy, but as a civilization of astonishing detail. It had receipts, prayers, quarrels, jokes, kings, widows, school exercises, workers, gods, and sorrow. There is something deeply moving in the ordinary records. A ration for a labourer, a note of delivery, a teacher's correction, a contract witnessed by names no one spoke for millennia. These are not the grandest monuments, yet they bring the dead nearest. They reveal that history is not only the movement of armies and the fall of cities, it is also the weight of grain in a bowl, the mark of a seal on wet clay, the tired hand of a scribe finishing one more line before darkness. The fall of Sumer was therefore not an erasure. It was a passage into layers. Its people became part of later populations. Its gods entered new arrangements. Its stories changed language. Its script evolved, spread, and served many tongues. Its cities were rebuilt, abandoned, remembered, and rediscovered. Its inventions became foundations so familiar that later ages could forget their origin. This is how some civilizations disappear. They become hidden inside the normal workings of the world. At the edge of evening, imagine one last scribe in a quiet room. The lamp is low, the clay is cool beneath his hand. Outside, The city has changed, and the speech in the street is not the speech of the oldest hymns. Still, he copies the ancient words carefully. He presses each sign with discipline learned from teachers who learned from teachers. He may not think he is saving a world. He may only be completing a lesson, honouring a god, serving an institution, or preserving a respected text. But the tablet remains long after his hand is dust, long after the roof falls, long after the room fills with earth. The signs wait. They wait through conquest, abandonment, weather, and forgetting. They wait until someone lifts them again into light and understands that the wedges are not random marks. They are breath made durable. The legacy of Sumer is not only that it was old, it is that it made human complexity visible at the dawn of written history. It showed cities learning to govern, worship, count, build, desire, fear, and remember. It showed how fragile civilization can be when tied to water, soil, labour, trust, and divine hope. It showed that greatness can rise from mud, and that mud can keep the memory of greatness long after towers fall. Now the plain is quiet. The rivers still move, though not as they once did. The stars still burn above the land where temple terraces stood. The wind still passes over mounds that hold rooms, streets, and names. Time has taken the voices, but not every trace of them. In the clay, in the signs, in the stories that wandered through later worlds, Sumer remains like a low lamp beneath the earth, dim but unextinguished. And in that gentle light, the lost world does not return as empire. It returns as memory,